So welcome everybody to the Performance and Overview Scrutiny Committee meeting of Tuesday the 10th of March. My name's Alistair Neil. Councillor Neil is chair of the committee, and we've got a really important agenda in front of us with three main reports which deal with our schools, the local authority, Monmouthshire County Council's work with the schools, and some of the really key issues that arise from within our school settings. And I hope that anybody who is watching this finds the discussion useful. Please do look at the reports. There's an awful lot of very good information in the reports, and we certainly would want to make sure that they're shared as widely as possible. So we'll make a start in the meeting proper. We have officers in front of us, and I believe, yes, we have the cabinet member. Welcome to Councillor Wright online, and also the officers in front of us will introduce themselves as they speak for the first time as we move into the first of the reports. So first of all, apologies for absence, and Robert.
We haven't got any today, Chair. No.
Thank you. And declarations of interest? I don't see any. We've not been notified. Public open forum, are there any issues raised?
No one today, Chair.
Thank you. So we'll move straight into the first of the reports, which is the Eston report. And our job is to scrutinise the findings of this latest Eston report. And before moving into, I don't know if it will be Councillor Wright or Will McLean who will be introducing the report, but I think it's just worth reflecting from the committee. Well done to all involved in what is included in this report. Some real positives, and we really welcome them. We've noticed them, and we really value the work that goes on right across the local authority and across our schools to make things as good as they possibly can be within the work that we do as a county council and the added value that we bring, and of course the amazing work that goes on day to day in our schools. So we will be going into some of the challenges within the reports, but I didn't want to lose the opportunity to say thank you and well done for those areas that are reflected very well within the report. And with that said, I'll move over to Will. Are you going to introduce the report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. My name is Will McLean. I'm the Strategic Director for Children Learning Skills and the Economy in Monmouthshire. And I'm really very grateful for the opportunity to come and talk to committee this morning about the Eston report into the local government education services provided by Monmouthshire County Council. I hope that members have found that the covering report just drew out some of the key aspects that we'll look to reflect on. But perhaps before I turn to the report itself, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the process by which we go through with Eston as a local authority. It is a little bit different to schools. It is a slightly elongated process. So as a local authority, we receive 8 weeks notice from Eston that their inspection is due, and during that period of time we have to provide Eston with a significant amount of evidence and information that is in addition to that which already sits in the public domain. We then have a pre-visit whereby a small group of Eston inspectors come to the local authority and undertake a number of focus groups. They were with us for 3 days. I think they undertook about 8 focus group meetings over the course of that period of time. Head teachers, both primary and secondary, interest groups, partners, governors, whole range of people in that initial visit. And then we have the actual visit itself. We had a team of 11 inspectors with us for the full week, and they did a huge number of both individual interviews, documentation reviews, and further group meetings as well. So it's a really very extensive evidence base that Eston draw upon to reach the conclusions that are presented in their report. I think the other thing to say, if I could just echo the Chair's words before I move into some of the detail, really, and just really pleased and very proud of the report and the work that my colleagues, the individuals and their teams have put into it to achieve the outcomes that Estin have identified. I think the other thing I'd like to do at the outset is to thank our colleagues in the Local Authority School Improvement Service, without whom our close working relationship, many of the very positive things in the report would not have been achieved, particularly with regarding the first question around how we support schools to improve. But also I'd like to thank Estin for the manner and the way in which they conducted the inspection. Often people talk about, inspections being kind of really significant and kind of quite a burden and a period of kind of worry. I think the way in which it was approached by our lead inspector was really done in a collaborative way. We met very regularly in the lead up to the inspection. We operated on an entirely kind of no surprises basis. And I think that led to a better, a more informed outcome in terms of where we were, because there was a real openness on both our side as the authority being inspected and Estin to look at the evidence as we presented it over that period of time. As Councillor Neil has made reference to, the inspection took place in November 2025. The report was published on the 23rd of January this year. Having said that, I think I'll turn a little bit to the actual report itself. I think for me, the key themes that come out of the report and that are repeated throughout, I think, are those around partnership, around professional learning and around improvement. And I think those are drawn out in nearly every single aspect that's referred to. And I think they give us a really sound basis for how we take the service forward. And I always try and look at inspection in that way, that is something which is, rather than something which is summative about the position you are in at a given moment in time, that it's a formative process which allows you to think in a really clear way about how you actually improve your system structures and processes to make sure that the next time the inspectors come, they'll see improvement again. And I think that is one of the most rewarding aspects of the report, is that it clearly identifies that there has been progress since our last inspection in 2020. So to turn to the report itself, and I'll only talk very briefly, really, I think, to the structure of the report, and then perhaps if I open and pass over to members for their questions. The report is structured in a way so it identifies a summary of what the inspectors found, and I'm really pleased that that's very broadly a very positive summary of where Monmouthshire is. It then goes on to identify the 3 recommendations that have been identified for the local authority. Those recommendations were to improve the consistency of evaluative processes, to evaluate the impact of local authority work more effectively, to improve attendance, particularly for second-age pupils and for key learner groups, and to continue to support and challenge schools to reduce deficit budgets. So 3 very clear recommendations from Estin. As ever, a significant test is, do the Estin recommendations align to the evaluative work that you had done beforehand? And I think we would recognise those recommendations as being areas that we knew we needed to focus on and continue to work on. So in that way, there was a degree of reassurance for us. The report and the way in which Estin inspect local authorities focuses around a number of what they call local inspection questions. We had 4 local inspection questions. The first one was, how well does the local authority support and challenge their schools to improve outcomes for pupils, including those who are more able? That section of the report is on page 4. And I think is a very positive reflection on the work that colleagues both within the organisation, as in Monmouthshire, but also within the Local Authority School Improvement Service, really work very closely to both challenge our schools, but more than that, to support our schools to make the improvements that we want to see them make for the children who are in their schools. There are some very pleasing aspects to that. The focus on improving outcomes for more able pupils, and you can see in the second paragraph on page 4 that Estin note that that's had a notable impact on the outcomes for the more able and talented pupils, particularly at the end of Key Stage 4. And I'm sure that's something that my colleague Ed will pick up on when we come to talk about the Key Stage 4 outcomes a little bit later this morning. The second question that Estin addressed was how effective is the local authority's provision for supporting children and young people with additional learning needs. This is, and I've no doubt will continue to be, an area of significant focus for the local authority. The very positive report that sits within this particular question is really important to us because it's an area that we've invested a huge amount of time and resource in. We've grown the team internally. We've invested more money to be passed to schools to support our children with additional learning needs. And it was a recommendation that last time Estin left us with. So to see the very positive feedback with regards to the trajectory of improvement that we've seen since then is really rewarding. And in particular, the fact that the work that colleagues in the inclusion service led by Dr. Wagstaff have undertaken to establish the Monmouthshire Autism in Schools and Settings programme achieve a spotlight, which is an identified area of good practice, was really rewarding. That's not to say that we'll be complacent with regard to our provision for ALN. It remains an area where there are significant demands at both the school and the local authority level. And we know that there are some specific areas where we need to provide additional support. Estin have helpfully identified some of those areas. Again, areas where we had plans in development, but particularly for those children who have SEMH needs, so that's social, emotional, and mental health needs, and the fact that we still place some of our children who have profound and multiple learning difficulties into out-of-county placements. We have been very effective over time at bringing children who have been placed out of county back into county. We have been really successful in ensuring that the mainstream is well placed to deliver additional support for children, but there are invariably tensions in that model, and we continue to work through those with our colleagues in school. The third question that Estin looked at was how effective our work was in improving the attendance of pupils in schools and in EOTIS provision. EOTIS is education other than at school. And I think really pleasingly, I think Estin recognised that the approach we've taken is trauma informed. It relates very clearly to the challenges that pupils right through the age range have faced since the pandemic. There are clearly some stubborn challenges for Monmouthshire with regards to our attendance, but what that mustn't overshadow is the success that we've had in terms of primary attendance and in terms of achieving some exceptionally high levels of attendance in our schools. We do know that there's work to do in those areas, and I know that my colleague Sharon Randall-Smith will address those when she presents on the attendance of the last academic year later this morning as well. The final local question, so one specifically focused and tailored to Monmouthshire, addressed how well the local authority supports and develops the use of Welsh in their settings and schools. This is an area of development for us. We were aware of that as we went into the inspection. We were aware of that because a number of our schools, when they were inspected, had recommendations associated with the development of either the Welsh language or the Welsh culture in their school. So it was apparent that that was going to be an area of focus for Estin. However, really pleasing to see that the partnership approach by both colleagues in Monmouthshire and in LACIS provides a good structure using the Welsh and Education Strategic Plan and our local forum to develop our aspiration and our ambitions. It clearly identifies that there are remaining issues at a school level, and in some places the transition of learners at the end of Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3 is not as high in the Welsh medium as we would hope it could be. But it does again recognise, as I go back to my earlier comments around the overarching themes, that the importance and the benefit of specialist professional learning for the Welsh language will hopefully see that kind of improve further. I think I would just add with regards to this that Council passed the budget last Thursday, and within that budget there was further support for the development of the Welsh language identified. And I know we're looking forward to bringing new colleagues on board to Monmouthshire to progress that, and looking forward to embracing the ambitions of the Welsh Education Act and its ambitions for how we can further develop Welsh in our schools. So those were the four local questions. The final part of the report focuses on leading and improving. I think there are a series of really positive statements regarding the leadership of the local authority, both at an officer and a member level, which is a positive to see, I think, and reflects the approach that we've sought to develop over time. At the bottom of page 10 and over the page into page 11, there's a piece around the approach that we've taken to select and to scrutiny, and there are clearly some aspects that we will need to address as we go forward in terms of how we provide to you information that really allows you to fulfill your scrutiny role as effectively as you can. And I hope the reports that we presented today begin to see that accessibility and allow you to question us in a very clear way. Clearly, one of the aspects that we have to focus on is around how we evaluate and how we plan for improvement across our services. I think Estin had seen, well, I know Estin had seen improvement from the 2020 to the 2025 inspection in terms of how we do that, in terms of the data, and in terms of the activities that we undertake to gather that information to evaluate our progress. I think there is a question around how consistently we do that across the different aspects of our services, and that will clearly be a focus for us in the coming years to make sure that what can be seen as good practice is consistently applied across the organisation. The leading and improving focuses on a range of aspects. It focuses on leadership, it focuses on evaluation, but critically, it also focuses on safeguarding. And I'm really pleased in front of the committee today, and I know you've had reports from colleagues who sit in our social care directorate around safeguarding over time, both in this committee and in full council, that this report echoes the confidence that has been expressed elsewhere around the safeguarding approaches that we undertake in Monmouthshire. And I think to see it written that the local authority promotes a strong culture of safeguarding is really positive for us. The other aspect, I think, is in the following paragraph, where it reflects that the local authority listens to its children and young people well, is really important. When we look back and we think about challenges that we've seen across Wales, such as the child practice review regarding in Gwynedd, regarding the Foden case, that ability to actually hear the child's voice is really important, and to see it captured is really pleasing for us in terms of the service. We then work through into the use of resources, and the report, I think, is very fair and balanced in terms of how it captures where we are. It captures the fact that we have increased the spending in education in the recent past. It captures the fact that it is a high priority for the local authority, but it doesn't shy away from the fact in any way about the level of deficits, the number of schools in deficits, and the challenge that has both to the local authority's financial standing, which is an argument in the position which has been well rehearsed in this committee, but also the extent to which it could challenge the school's ability to improve themselves. We have some specific pieces of work to undertake, and our colleagues in this instance from the Wales Audit Office, because this part of the work is undertaken by Wales Audit Office or Audit Wales, are very clear for us. We are engaging with our schools in a different way now. We meet in a multi-disciplinary way with our schools to address overspends, and we will continue to do that. We have some specific pieces of work, such as reviewing our financing scheme for schools, so that it reflects some of the challenges that we have at the moment, and we will continue to do that, again, working in partnership with our schools budget forum. I think, Chair, that concludes the observations that I hope to make on the report today. I hope members have enjoyed reading the report. It is, I think, a really important report for the authority. Education is a very significant part of our endeavours every day. I think in the opening paragraphs, it states, that there are 11,000 pupils every day who go to schools, and this captures a really positive perspective on the work that we do to support those children and young people and the schools in which they attend. So I'll be happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Will. It's a really good overview, I think, of the report too, and I'm really glad you singled out that particular component, which I was going to do so myself. It's worth just reading out that paragraph. Throughout the local authority, children and young people are listened to well and their views are taken into account. For example, children and young people's voice is central to the practitioner concerns process, underpinned by the local authority's participation strategy. I think it's such a great foundation point for how we really do everything we can as a council to support our young people. So I was really pleased to see that and that you pointed that out as well, Will. I think it's worth mentioning with the march of time how some of the points have really moved on significantly. Looking at the section on page 14, I think it is, it's a long section, the leading and improving section, where there is reference to the way that we manage our finances now and the need to update it. They've not been updated since the scheme for financing skills has not been updated since 2018, so no longer reflects the authority's current approach and the changed operating environment. I think we'll probably come back to that given some of the very clear financial challenges. The report in that section also makes reference, and I can find it to, as of March 2025, 43% of Monmouthshire schools were in deficit, with a combined deficit of 4.1 million. Well, we heard just last month that the latest forecast places that at 7.6 million. So it's a huge increase in deficit, and there is already within the report significant reference paid to this. It just makes me wonder just how much more substance there would be to that reference from the Eston team if they were looking purely at the current level of forecast for this year at 7.6 million forecast overspend. So we'll I'm sure come back to that. But thank you for that. I'm just really conscious that Councillor Wright, you may have some points to add to the comments that that Will has made about the report.
I mean, I think Will has covered this so comprehensively, Chair, that I don't have an awful lot extra to add. As you might expect, I'm just extremely proud of the outcome with our Monmouthshire Autism in Schools and Settings programme. I think the introduction of an autism champion in every school and the way we have really listened to and had genuine co-production with our autistic learners has been really important. And I think we have a lot to be proud of in terms of the progress we've made on provision for pupils with additional learning needs since our last report in 2020. So I completely acknowledge, Chair, that we have a lot of challenges around school budgets, but I wouldn't want us to lose sight of the fact that there are also a huge number of positives in this report that I hope we will have the opportunity to discuss as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. And so I'm opening it to questions, and I see Councillor Strong with your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And again, to echo the thanks, I think all members will Phil, towards the officers and staff, at county level, right down to school level, for the achievements that have been made, and we absolutely have to keep that very much in sight as we go through scrutiny, which inevitably does tend to focus on the more challenging areas. So I won't shy away from school deficits. Because the chair has raised the issue. I'm particularly interested in the bit that says reports to elected members do not sufficiently articulate the reasons for individual school overspends or the impact of the council's intervention. Now, it's identified in the preliminary report here that one of our jobs today is to identify priority areas for future consideration, and I think this is one. I fully appreciate that on a day-to-day basis, the deficits are matters for the head teachers, who I'm sure do think about them on a day-to-day basis, and the governing bodies. But ward members up and down the county will face questions about the issues in their local schools. So it's important that I think that we do know, as far as is possible, why these deficits are arising, but also at a county level, unless we know what the problem is, how are we going to identify policy areas to deal with them? So the first of my two questions would be to ask, well, it's partly to the chair, can we prioritise that area? And if Will has any insight that he wants to offer at this stage, I'm clearly not asking for a full answer to that question today, but it is very detailed. If there's any particular insight you want to add to that, Phil, please do so. Different tack on my second question. It's identified that 12% of our pupils are identified as having additional learning needs. And again, I would note the extremely good work that's being done there. But we have 12% against the Wales average of 10%. That's a bit counterintuitive to me, because elsewhere in the report, and it's well known, correlations between levels of deprivation and educational performance would suggest that perhaps we ought to have a lower level of additional learning needs. So questions arising from that is that difference significant, or is it just a statistical blip that we don't need to really worry about in any sense? Or is there perhaps something about Monmouthshire parents being above average in their willingness or ability to push for the necessary support, diagnosis, and so on? Or is it something that the authority is doing? And in the end, are we over-diagnosing, or are we confident that we're accurate in our assessments? Yeah. So yeah, two questions there, if you wouldn't mind.
Thank you, Councillor Strong, and it's worth just emphasising the point that you're making. We're not in any ordinary month. We're in a week where tomorrow and the next day there is a strike in King Henry School, and next week there are 3 days of strikes in King Henry School, and these appear to be due to staff concerns about budget cuts. So that this is not another issue. It's an incredibly important issue because it can have so much other impact on pretty well every other aspect of schooling if we don't fully understand what's going on and our role in this. So just to emphasize that point around the deficits. But Will, did you want to pick up the questions that Councillor Strong's raised?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I will take those. So I think to Councillor Strong's first point in terms of how we report to you, and Nikki Wellington and I have spoken about this already. I think in terms of the budget reporting that comes through, I think you can expect to see greater granularity in terms of the trend of the deficit or surplus that the school has. if the school has an agreed recovery plan with the local authority, whether it's on track to meet that, and identification of any particular risks that might exist in specific schools. So that part, in terms of greater detail in terms of the reporting, we can absolutely do. We will also, and we can also very clearly, and it's drawn out in the report as well, we have a very clear and good understanding of what drives overspend positions in schools, and we'll be able to do that very clearly. It is often related to staffing costs, often relating to supply costs, often relating to where schools make decisions around provision for children with additional learning needs. So we'll be able to do that, and perhaps if it was timely and helpful, by the time we come to kind of year-end reporting, actually we'll be able to provide a more detailed aspect as to what's driven that position. I'd be more than happy to do that. Both, I think probably it's always about that balance around sharing the knowledge that we have with you about the local authority position without putting information regarding individual specific schools which might be unhelpful to that school in front of an open committee. And I think the nature of the open committee is really important in us sharing that information. You're also correct to draw on the fact that, you know, that we need to see a greater impact in terms of the work that we do to stop schools overspending, and that's important that once we've captured that, that we identify that and message that to you, so you have that level of assurance as well. With regards to the position around the additional learning needs, and I am acutely aware that there are people in the chamber today who'll be better placed than I am to answer that. So whenever we talk about additional learning needs and children with additional learning needs, that now specifically only refers to children who have an individual development plan. So it's a very tightly defined definition. There will be other children who have barriers to learning in our schools, so they don't meet that threshold for that legal documentation. I think to be within 2% of the Welsh average is a combination of factors as well, and you've referred to some of them. I think our parents do an exceptional job in terms of advocating for their children's needs and being very clear about what their expectations are. That brings with it some challenges sometimes, but actually, you know, we want people to talk up and talk about what their children need to succeed in school. So the correlation that we see between deprivation and attainment is probably clearer. So I think given the work that is undertaken and done so well by the inclusion team in terms of addressing and understanding those children's needs, I'm confident in that number and it being the number that is right for the children and the schools in Monmouthshire. If I can just come back as well to the chair's comments around the industrial action. We did obviously have a day of industrial action last week in King Henry VIII, and sadly, the chair is correct in that there are a further 2 days planned for this week. We're doing all we can to ensure that those days of industrial action do not need to go ahead. Unfortunately, as it stands at the moment, they will proceed. That is a complex picture. I think that the work that has been done to provide comfort and assurance around any potential compulsory redundancies has been significant. I think that we are clear from work that's been undertaken that we are trying to size the school staff to be the right size for the size of school that it is. There will be some difficult decisions that have to be made in that regards, but our commitment to continue to work with the union and to work with the school union, school leadership to mitigate and negate the need for any further industrial action remains consistent. I would also draw out the fact that working with Councillors Wright and Callard, we've agreed a recovery period, which is not as long as 10 years as is referenced in the report, but is over a significant period of time, very much to allow the school to recover in a way that's based on the growth of pupil numbers and it gaining a stable and established school base, as opposed to a much more draconian expectation for the school to recover very quickly, which would undoubtedly have seen significant staffing reductions. So we are doing all we can to make sure that the school has that ability to recover over the medium term and does not put the education of children at risk.
Councillor Strong.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that. That's quite reassuring in its own way. You know, in relation to Abergavenny, it would help us if we knew more. The answer to the questions that the teachers are asking is how is this arisen? For example, just to back up the initial point I made. But yeah, thanks very much for those.
It's worth, I think, just making this point, Will, that the overall forecast deficit is not, of course, uniquely related to King Henry School. It started the year at £4 million. It's ending the year, on the latest numbers that we were given last month, at £7.5 million. And I think residents would be extremely concerned to understand how on earth is it that an already high forecast overspend is getting on for doubling in the course of a year. And the approach that's being taken, you've mentioned that the recovery plans are significantly based on the growth of numbers of residents with homes with children who would be attending a school. That presumably will not fix all the different deficits around the county, which include primary schools, where we have one primary school with a deficit of £345,000, another with a deficit of £240,000, another with a deficit of £250,000, and so on around the county. We've got the majority of schools in deficit, and is that the strongest suit that we've got, which is to say, with the rise in numbers of children coming to be part of families moving into the area, that is the way out of the deficit situation for schools. Just lastly on this point, you mentioned when we were asking about this in the last couple of months that the length of time that would be given to schools would be of the order of 8 years. The report's talking in 10 years. It's broadly the same thing, which is into the extremely long term, during which time the council is carrying the cost of this. So there must be a question about whether by carrying the cost of this, schools are not being focused on managing their own costs and to work within those. So there's some real concern within this, and you've made some important points in what you just said. I just thought it was appropriate while we're talking about that to register those points.
Yeah, if I can just come back on a couple of those, Chair. So my point around was specific to Abergavenny with regards to the stability of the numbers in the school, and what we have actually seen is very, very significant growth post-16, for instance, in that one setting, and that does help stabilise funding into the future. I am, to be really very clear, I'm not suggesting for one moment that pupil growth will see us through and out of the financial predicaments that many of our schools find themselves in. It is incumbent upon the governing body, it is incumbent upon the head teacher to manage within the resources that are allocated to that school. There will be tensions in me making that statement because there is inevitably, and we will have seen from widespread national coverage, concerns around the level of funding in education in Wales. However, the local authority funds the schools. We saw a significant increase last year, which took us above the Welsh median. That similar investment has been made again this year. That should again help the schools to live within their means. The dialogue with the schools is always about how do you stay within that budget in terms of being very clear about what our expectations are. There will be, and I think it would be remiss of me not to say, there will have to be some very difficult debates and discussions in the coming period of time for us to recover that position. We are aware of that. I think the schools are actually aware of that as well. The primary schools that you cite are areas for concern. We are working very closely with them. They have to come in, they meet with my colleagues to understand how they're doing certain things, the decisions they're making, the rationale behind them, their expectations around staffing ratios, their expectations around the type of support. And that is at the level that we're working with the schools on to make sure that they understand that there cannot be a continuing drain in terms of the pull on the local authorities' resource. And you're exactly right to identify that it sits on our balance sheet, and it's a risk to the local authority. So you're exactly right in that sense. But we've been absolutely explicit with the schools as to our expectations in terms of them returning to a position of balanced budgets.
Thank you, Will. I think we all also recognise that this is very challenging. So, there isn't a sort of simple solution that I'm sure any one of us is putting forward, but we recognise how challenging it is. But I come back to the Eston report on this issue while we're talking about it at 3.8 of the report, and bearing in mind that, as I was pointing out earlier, Eston is relating to the deficit at the beginning of the year, which was close to just about £4 million. It's now 7.6 million forecast. Eston notes that reporting to elected members does not always clearly articulate the impact of interventions on the longer term risks associated with rising deficits. And I think that's at the heart of some of the concern that's expressed here. Do we understand what the impacts are, what the impacts within schools can be, the impacts therefore on learning and so many other aspects, because finance underpins pretty well everything within any school setting. So it's just relating it back to this, Will. I think it is important Eston have identified that at a point where the deficits were getting on for about 50% of what they are forecast to be now.
So if I can, Chair, just to be really clear that Eston had full sight of the expected year-end balance. So we didn't report on last year's number. They've had visibility of all of the reporting positions all the way through the year. So they will be reporting on the £7.6 million. So we haven't tried to obfuscate that in any way. What I would say is that the school's position in many parts has been because schools are trying to support learners in a certain way. There is a consequence for that, which is if you then have to make a recovery position, it is likely that in the future, you will not have the resource to fund children and support children in the same way you have in the past. So there is a question of almost equity over time in terms of how you support your children. So our discussions and the reason for the approach which has been taken and agreed with the cabinet members is because we want to allow that support to continue, but we want to allow that support to continue in a way which is informed by the best practice, which has been identified in the report, that is understood, that can be shared by the professionals who work for the local authority, who can work with the schools, so that we understand this is the best way. And we've seen changes in practice. We've seen the movement away from one-to-one provision for children with ALN not actually being the best provision for those children. We've seen that working with children in small groups is much, much more effective. We know that children being in their mainstream settings is better for the children, better for their community than using out of county. So we're taking these steps to make sure that they have a beneficial impact. There is still time. There is a lag around that. I will not hide away from that. And clearly the deficit position is far in excess of what we would wish to see. It is a challenge that all of Wales faces, but that does not deny in any way the steps that we are going to have to take locally to address that position.
Thank you, Will. That's very helpful. I'm going to move on to Councillor Bond. I see you have your hand up.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for all the reports, and especially the scrutiny document. That was a really good summary of what the Eston report says, and really commend all the people in the area, in education, the staff, everybody for the delivery of education for our young people. Great improvements and great strengths has been identified in this report, especially around, if I give you an example, around the leadership is a clear strength underpinned by coherent strategy, vision rooted in equity, inclusion and strong values. That's fostering trust, transparency and cohesive, effective collaboration. So I'm saying that so I can balance the fact there's some howevers which has been identified. And there's too much variation in the quality and precision of the evaluation across services, often focusing on activity rather than clearly evidencing impact of outcomes on children and young people. Now, that along with the massive improvements in ALN and the MASS programme, absolutely brilliant what is going on. But there's some areas, as you've identified in there, of improvement that we should be working towards. So the question is really, how can we help this happen as a scrutiny group? So I'd hoped there would be, you've said verbally that we've been working on lots of these areas, we know what they are, we know what our plans are. I wonder if there's anything that we can have, and I'd hoped that there would be some writing as, yes, we're doing this, this and this towards that issue, and we're doing this, this and this, we've got plans. And I wonder if it would be useful if we had that sort of information or had some input to help achieve and help as a scrutiny group follow the improvements through to conclusion. I wonder how we can do that. So a lot of good work has been done, but there's quite a few howevers insofar as improvement, including the deficits, which you've been talking about. But really, really commend the improvements in ALN, MASS, all the other areas in attendance and whatever. So brilliant work being done. But how can we help to help you track or help in the scrutiny process, help you achieve closing those gaps? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. And you're asking a question laterally there, which we discussed at the pre-meeting today, and it's probably worth just setting that out as you're asking it, that we concluded that it would be a really useful thing for us to establish a task and finish group of some committee members to work with some of the officers and the team within the directorate to see how we can help, see how we can understand maybe some areas better in order to be able to reach some recommendations that can be helpful to the directorate. I mentioned that to Will just at the very outset of the meeting, but just mentioning it now as you're asking that question. But back to your other questions, Councillor Bond and Will, if you wanted to pick them up.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and just on that, the latter point, I think we would work, be more than happy to work with a task and finish group in a focused area. It sounds as though the deficits are an area potentially for focus for us to understand that and understand the different aspects and different parts of the system and what drives expenditure in those aspects as well. So yes, more than happy to do that, of course. I think to Councillor Bond's point, I think one of the things that came out during the discussions around the inspection and this point around variability and variance was that there are some areas who evaluate very well, and there are others where it is, you've identified, more based on activity rather than the impact. A lot of your ability, one's availability, as opposed to Councillor Bond's ability, one's ability to evaluate in a very clear way is being very specific about understanding what your outcomes are or what your expectations are at the beginning of that work. So one of the things which working with colleagues in the management team at the moment is to pull together for the coming administrative year, so 26-27, a directorate-wide plan that sits between the service improvement plans that all of the teams have and the community and corporate plan. And that document will allow us to be far more specific in terms of the improvement planning that we're looking to achieve, which will then allow us to be more precise in our evaluative activity and understanding if we've achieved the outcomes that we were seeking, and equally, what was it that caused us not to achieve those outcomes, if that is what happened, or if we were to exceed those outcomes, what was it that led to that? So that will form a part of the strategic director's report that I'm hoping to bring to council in June, as I do every year. So you'll be able to see both that backward look, but also that forward look. And that forward look will have that level of precision that will allow for that clarity in evaluative activity to be undertaken. So I hope that provides some assurance, Councillor Bond. And as I've said, yes, more than happy to work with members of the committee as we go forward as well.
Chair, could I just come back, please?
Please.
So would it be useful to come back to performance and overview, perhaps before June, before you present that to council, and so because it really was the plan or the answer to all those questions, all those howevers, sorry, those few howevers. Let's put it into balance. Can we see that? Can we see, will you come back to us and give us a progress report, as it were, or are you suggesting that the task and finish group would be that format or forum?
So, Councillor Bond, I suspect, and happy to have a discussion with the chair, that I suspect it's probably a both. So I would be more than happy to bring back a report to performance and overview that sets out our plans for how we address the recommendations and the however statements. That can be specific to those which are contained within the Eston report, or the broader ambitions that we try and capture both from the community and corporate plan and in our own risk assessment of where the system is at the moment. So we can do that, certainly. On the latter point, which is around the task and finish group, I suspect that in order for that to be as successful as we would wish, we would want to be very precise about the outputs and the outcomes that it should achieve. And I suspect that we probably won't do that in discussion this morning, but that will be something which we take away after the meeting.
Lovely, thank you very much.
Sorry, Councillor Bond, I was just in reference to what Will said. I think that's the right approach, Will, but we can pick that up after the meeting. Thank you, Councillor Bond. Was there anything else you wanted to follow up on that? Okay, thank you. And over to Councillor Buckler. I think you have your hand up.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Will. It's not a light thing to go through an Eston sort of investigation, really, and it's very illuminating. So thank you for highlighting it. It does. The report does provide reassurance about leadership and strategic direction, but it also highlights a clear theme that we as an authority must strengthen our ability to measure impact. Without sharper evaluation, clearer financial oversight of schools, and faster improvement in secondary attendance, it will be difficult for us as a committee to judge whether these interventions are genuinely improving outcomes for our young people, which of course is what we all want. We've mentioned the sort of task force attached to this committee, which I think would be a very helpful thing. It's not just the deficit, as we know, Will. So, what I'd like to just flag up, and it's actually a recurrent theme from all the committee members so far that we've been hitting upon, which is a clearer outcome-focused performance framework would be helpful. Attainment trends, exclusions, additional learning needs, progress measures, and intervention impact measures. So that would clearly and directly address Eston's criticism of under-evaluation. And a formal school deficit recovery strategy. It is, concerning that we have the highest per pupil level of deficit in Wales, which seems, that is of serious concern. So, to have causes of deficit school by school would be helpful. And benchmarking with other Welsh authorities. It has been mentioned before, the fact that the school financing scheme hasn't been reviewed since 2018, and it seems that is something obviously that is that we need to look at. So and to have a targeted secondary attendance improvement plan, a focused strategy. So these are all things that we would like to delve into, and I appreciate it's an enormous task, but it's one we're all committed to for the best of our young people in Monmouthshire. And any thoughts, Will, on that would be welcome.
Thanks, Councillor Buckler. And some of that, Will, you might want to pick up in terms of school attendance when we come to the third of the reports, but however you want to respond to that.
Thank you, Councillor Buckler. Thank you, Chair. I think there's an awful lot in there, Councillor Buckler. The key part in terms of us being really able to evaluate our work is that it is our work. I think I once worked out that I think the activity that takes place in the classroom is, if I'm not a fan of tiers and layers, but there are probably 7 or 8 between me and the child who's sitting in their GCSE class today. So how we give account in a really clear way for the activity that we undertake and the impact that has on children has to be understood in the context in terms of the direct work that we are doing and undertaking. It's very much, for me, our role to create the strategic conditions for those actions, for that work to take place and to have an impact. So as an example, and Ed's here from LACES today, the way in which we commission LACES, the way in which we understand the way in which they work, the way in which we hold them to account, which is part of the relationship, of course, the way in which we understand the work of our school improvement partners in schools that gives us a sense of security around the standards and the progress that is being made in school is all part of that evaluative and quality assurance framework. We'll hear from Ed a little bit later what the actual specific outcomes look like. And again, that is part of that broad piece of work. I think you are absolutely right to say that we do need a specific piece of work around secondary attendance, and that's something which Sharon and I have talked about, and for those groups of learners within that. So we know, for instance, that for all of our secondary schools, the attendance of children eligible for free school meals remains too low and needs to be addressed. Again, that is something which we do in partnership with the schools activity alongside our activity. We're at the very, very sharpest end of that process. We're at the end which could potentially culminate in prosecution for someone not attending school. The day-to-day encouragement, the importance, the engagement of being in school is with the school. The support that we're able to provide wraps around, helps, supports families, helps understand if there are barriers to attending school. So it's about understanding how that system is working. That's the critical part. And that's why, to go back to one of the strengths of the report, the partnership nature of the way in which our Education Welfare Service, our school improvement partners, our educational psychologists, all of those people work in partnership with the schools to enable those outcomes to be made. So I'm always really clear that it would be wrong in many ways for us to claim the excellent outcomes that some of our young people achieve. We have been a part of a system that's created the opportunity for them to do that, and that's what we should do. So I think we need to find a really balanced way of identifying where we can intervene, what the expected impact of our intervention is, and then we can then evaluate how successful that has been. So that would be my only comment there. I think everything you've talked about is relevant to this committee. I think it's really important that we continue to feed back on those things, and we will continue to do so.
Thank you, Will. And Councillor Buckler, was there anything you wanted to follow on that?
No, well, thank you, Will, and you know, we're all in it together, aren't we? But thank you for going through that like that.
Okay, great. And over to Councillor Howells, who's got his hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Will. I was very interested to hear you mention the budget does provide extra funding for Welsh language in our schools. Wales, as a fluent language, must be quite a challenge in our English border Welsh border to England county of Monmouthshire. In Carmarthenshire, which is where I'm from, when I visit there, it's quite commonplace to visit a shop or a restaurant and be able to speak in Welsh. Saying that, I did visit the Usk Community Hub yesterday, and I chatted in Welsh to the Welsh reading group that was there, and then I moved to another part of the library, and the TFE group were there, so we're moving in the right direction. However, on that backdrop, it must be a large challenge for our authority to narrow the gap that the Welsh average is 14% of children at age 5 or over are fluent in Welsh, compared to our 2% in Monmouthshire. I was also pleased to see that Welsh A level is on the increase in our schools. I note that it is only a minority of learners that do not transition to Welsh medium secondary school. But I would be interested to hear what measures are being put in place to support more learners transitioning into secondary school. What are the targets and timescales to increase our fluent Welsh learners that we can realistically achieve? And finally, how is the extra budget funding and how will that be spent?
Thank you, Councillor Howells.
Okay, Joel. So thank you, Councillor Howells. It is really important for us, and we have the Welsh Education Strategic Plan agreed by Council. It's a cornerstone of our policy and our strategic drive, and much of what we've been working on in the past period is to get us to a position whereby we have 4 classes of learners who conclude the Key Stage 2 of their education through the medium of Welsh, and we've made good steps towards that. So we have Ifeen in Caldecott, we have Trevynwy, our seedling school in Monmouth, and in September this year we will see Ysgol Ifenny develop into a 2-form entry school. So we're seeing that progress. It is, you know, by dint of the nature of Monmouthshire being on this kind of border position that we see, you know, ourselves very much as a proud Welsh authority. But there are some challenges with regards to the nature and I guess the linguistic nature of the authority itself. We are probably the furthest away from one of the Welsh-speaking heartlands in Wales, and we're making as good a progress as quickly as we can on that. It is more than education as well, though. It is a whole authority ambition, and our contributions to the Welsh Government's ambitions around 1 million Welsh speakers by 2050 are also a whole authority endeavour as well. It might be, and I suspect, a point of reflection for me, for us to include very explicitly in the Strategic Director's report a commentary around our how far we've moved to meeting the ambitions of the WESP. And I think that we could do that in that document, which will hopefully provide that level of assurance there. In terms of the decision at full council, the new legislation that is coming into place that will expect, I think I'm right in saying, 10% of education to be provided through the medium of Welsh by 2030. That member of staff will be very much involved in driving that, working very much alongside our colleagues from LACIS. We are really pleased about the strength of the relationship around the Welsh work, the very positive way in which that engagement takes place with our schools. To enable that to be developed further, we have identified that it was our first priority for work for this year. So we've undertaken a whole authority piece of professional learning, and colleagues from LACIS will be undertaking a dip sample to understand the impact of that professional learning in the summer term. So there is an awful lot of work ongoing there. I won't do it justice by trying to answer it all now, but we will bring it back either to this committee or to full council where we've made progress against the WESP.
Councillor Howes, any other points?
No, just to say diolch yn fawr, Will.
Great. Just on that point, because we've recognised, of course, the importance of Welsh language. As I understand it, the WJEC GCSE Welsh Second Language Oral Exams, Unit 1, which comprise 25% of the GCSE grade, are taking place in Wales this week between the 10th and the 12th of March, is my understanding. If King Henry's School is on strike, as seems to be confirmed on the 11th and 12th of March, does that affect the pupils in those specific exams?
So, Chair, as far as I understand, no exam classes are affected by the industrial action taking place in King Henry. My understanding is, I think that the exams are next week in King Henry. I will check that. There's normally the window that people are able to sit those, but I will check that and come back.
But they're on strike for 3 days next week.
No, it's the week after next week.
Thank you. It would be, I think, really important just if you could check that, because we certainly don't want to not understand whether or not pupils themselves are missing out on the opportunity of sitting the exam.
I would completely agree with that, and I would hope very much that colleagues in the trade union would also recognise that.
Great, thank you. I see no other hands up. Councillor House still has his legacy hand up. Thank you, Councillor House. And therefore, I'm going to move the report and the recommendations. And in doing so, we've covered some really important ground. And thank you very much, Will, for some very straightforward responses to some challenging issues, alongside our reflections that there is a great deal that is really excellent in the report that we are extremely pleased to see, and we certainly wish to pass that back to the entire team involved. There's some terrific things in there. We've necessarily focused on some of the more challenging issues, and just at the as we finish that section, yes, we will move forward with the task and finish group, and the definition around that is something we'll pick up beyond the meeting and the time frame in which we do that. So yeah, recommendations and the report moved, and we move on to the second of the reports on item 5, which is school examination results. And I don't know who wants to pick this up. Ed, are you going to go straight into that? And thank you. Welcome to the meeting. If you could just introduce yourself, and that would be great.
Board Pawb, Ed Price, Assistant Director with LASIS, the Local Authority School Improvement Service. One of my roles is looking at performance data. Now, you'll recall 3 years ago when data returned, we went straight into the paper. What I did last year was give a very short briefing. It's only 10 slides, which I'd like to repeat if that's okay, because I know you revisit this only on an annual basis, just to remind of the data that we are covering. It's worth remembering that data returned post-pandemic only as late as 2023. So we've got 3 years of data and information available to us. Schools were informed that of the March of that year that they would return. Very much based all Wales core data sets. We love the jargon of certain elements there. It's worth bearing in mind that they're predominantly for school use, those data packs. The total across the full Monmouthshire settings with 14 to 16 provision would be about 500 pages if you totaled it as well in terms of the data, not going through every element of that. A range of new measures, some legacy measures retained. I think the key parts are on the third bullet point, that to compare with fairly, it is compared with families of 10 similar schools that I will go through across Wales, and modelled estimates, Welsh Government model estimates, which I'll unpick and remind you of what those are and how they work. So the data started with only being for 2023, but it is now 3 years of data available to us. The model of families, which I'll cover, is 10 or 11 for most schools, similar English medium families, which I'll show where the 4 Monmouthshire schools are. The data was refreshed in 23, but the families, as far as we look at them, remain the same for the last 3 years. An important health warning on the bottom: the data only tells us one element. It is the core of it. It is about self-evaluation within schools and school improvements purposes, and it remains the statutory responsibilities of governing bodies to be holding schools to account using a broad range of information, not just examination outcomes. I will cover a little bit of this in the paper as well, but we are not just starting looking at this data now. It's only now because the data has only been finalised, checked, and it is only finally published in January. The work in schools with the local authority, my school improvement colleagues, begins in earnest in September in looking at the outcomes, not as late as now. The families, very briefly, they have remained the same. They were first introduced in about 2012 originally, where a range of factors were giving. It's 9 to 10 schools in a family where a range of factors are used. So it's based on free school meals, Wells Index of Multiple Deprivation, which I'm sure as members you'll be aware of, only a small proportion on individual development plans and statements of special educational needs, and only a small proportion on new to English language or Welsh language where relevant. What happens in the data for those 4 metrics for each school are added together, and they rank all 200 secondary schools in Wales into a table based on those, and they are then split into 10s. So you could be compared with schools in Gwynedd or Pembrokeshire or a school next door to you in the same local authority in Monmouthshire, and it is 23-25, not on the bottom of that. I realise this is a little bit small, but what it means is those are the 15 English medium families numbered from 7 to 21. The 1 to 6 are Welsh medium families, and you will see the most socioeconomic disadvantaged ones are in family 7, the least are in family 21, and you can see there the 4 schools in Monmouthshire highlighted towards the least socioeconomically disadvantaged end. What it means, though, when they're compared with schools that are very similar to them in terms of the communities that they serve, so that it is in a way more challenging. It's not a universal truth, but generally the performance of family 21 will be higher than the performance of family 20, although in some years that's not the case. So moving on to what we look at, the CAP9 measure, which is a broad measure of the performance of all the learners in a school, as well as the performance and outcomes. It also measures the breadth of what a school offers as well, which can cause complications for how you look at it, because it's measuring in a way 2 things. It measures what the school offer and the quality of the way they deliver what they offer and how the learners achieve. So the 3 core measures that Estin will tend to look at in a school are the literacy, numeracy, science, because those are more pure measures of how a learner is achieving and the provision within school as well. And then the Welsh Baccalaureate Skills Measure is a 5th one as well, and along with a range of additional information there, such as A-star to A, to look at the higher performance, gender gaps, free school meal, non-free school meal gaps, which I will cover briefly at the end of the paper. So the strange element of this, because we came accustomed over 25 years to A-star to C being the, or A to C in the past, being the sort of benchmark measure of what you would expect learners to achieve. With that, there was perhaps an incentive for schools to make sure they were getting the maximum out of learners who could achieve a C and moving learners from D to C, rather than necessary, I've not seen universal evidence of that happening in any way, but in terms of how schools were measured, D to C was the important boundary, rather than pushing learners on to A stars and pushing learners to get Gs and Fs as well, because if they weren't achieving any qualifications, perhaps for some learners, an F was a fantastic achievement for that learner. So a points-based system values all learners broadly in terms of the provision and the quality of what you do with them. But it does make it harder for the public to understand, as we've discussed in several years in the past, with this points-based score, which aren't about learners. It's not an American system where you need 500 points to get into university or anything like that. It's A stars and Bs and Cs, which are the currency for our learners and parents. But for schools, to compare them more fairly, we look at points. You'll notice a 6-point gap between every one. You'll notice it draws in vocational qualifications on the right as well, with a variance in terms of the tariffs there. That's a summary. The exam coordinators in school will probably, I think at the latest, had a 60-page booklet to see which subjects were eligible for those points. But that's a summary for you there. In terms of the CAP 9, the CAP 9 is the best 9 subjects that a learner achieves. Up until 2018, 5 of those were fixed. If you look at that model on the left, there was 2 maths qualifications, 2 science, 1 Welsh or English qualification there, and then flexibility in 4 of the other subjects. Although from 2019, it moved to 3 of them being fixed, a literacy GCSE, a numeracy-based GCSE, and a science-based GCSE, and then flexibility in the other 6. What this actually means is, in terms of how they are measured in terms of the CAP 9, there is more flexibility than ever to be offering 2/3 of your curriculum to meet the needs of individual learners within, obviously, constraints of resources. But it still retains the literacy, the numeracy, science, which are some of the strongest indicators of life chances for our learners. So it is a fairly broad, balanced measure. However, it is dependent on the curriculum you offer. So you do have to be aware when comparing schools that some schools can get higher CAP 9s, I'm talking across Wales now, by entering into subjects that may have a higher tariff, and you may double up. So if a learner's strong in a maths area, you may offer them maths, but also financial literacy as well. And for some of our learners, they may not need both, is what I'm saying. You've got to be careful as leaders to be making sure it is learner focused. You will see there the points at the bottom in 2 simple examples of A and B, the maximum points that an individual learners can get, 522 points. A mix of those 5 GCSEs and 2 vocational merits will get 256. All that happens is every learner's score is calculated and then it's multiplied to be across the whole school. So what it looks like in terms of the data, and this is where the charts do look a little bit ugly, in my opinion, in some of the ones that have been presented from Welsh Government, could be clearer. But what you've got to remember is a dot is a school. And this particular example, the pink dot is your school in the pack that you get. I'm not going to show you the school packs, but I'm going to show you the principles of it with this. What you've got on the graph on the bottom axis, the x-axis, you have got free school meals increasing. You have then got on the y-axis, truncated, unfortunately, between 300 and 500 points, you have got the performance. So you notice they don't go as high as 522, which could be the maximum for an individual learner, because schools aren't going to achieve that. You will notice the general trend, and this is the trend across Wales, it would be similar across virtually all developed countries as well, is that the line declines. So the higher the proportion of free school meals in your school, performance lowers. That is not putting a cap on individual free school meal learners, and it is certainly not saying that a free school meal learner could be the highest performer in your school, but it's saying statistically that trend is there. This will give you a feel for where you are as a school. And you can see for this pink school, it is pretty much smack on the line for where it should be across Wales. And it is pretty much smack in the middle of all the blue family members around it as well. But you'll notice the variance there. So you can say for this school, it is performing according to the Welsh Government model outcomes as expected. You can put that into a number as well. So you can put that into a positive number above the line or a negative number below the line to give you a definitive above or below. We are not overly concerned about schools that are very close to the line. They're performing as expected. What you're looking for is outliers. And what you don't want your school to be is an outlier significantly below the line over a significant period of time as well, I think is key. The numbers are actually there on the right-hand side. This is the final chart on this, and if you think the last one was slightly complicated, this is complicated by 3, because what they do is they take, imagine you have 120 learners in the cohort, they will take the top 40, the middle 40, and the bottom 40, and they will work out how they performed. So what you are doing is seeing how a school does for the most able, the middle ability, and the lowest ability. What you will notice, and this is a particularly interesting example, the upper third are all the sort of teal type colours, for want of a better word, on the top line. They're all pretty much grouped together, although there is variance there. You will notice the middle ability of schools are grouped together in the purple colour, but orange for our particular school. And you will notice the pink, mauve, whatever you care to choose it at the bottom, are the lowest 40 ability within your school. And bearing in mind most families are the same as this example, schools are pretty consistent for their most able learners. Schools are pretty consistent for their middle ability, but where you notice the variance is on the lowest ability. That's where schools make the biggest difference. But going back to Will's point earlier about the ESTIN inspection, there are a huge number of other factors outside school that can affect learners as well, such as community influences by the time they've reached 14 to 16, who their peer groups are, family influences, and those all factor into this picture as well to make it more complicated, measuring ultimately what we're trying to do, our impact and the impact of schools. So on that one, the final bit, I've exploded and gone into it a bit, is what you were looking at is what is the differential between the line, and that's the Wales comparison, but contextualized, and where we are as a school. I have picked a particularly anodyne example where we are above for all three in this, and you would have positive figures above the line in this, but we can have a look at some of these charts with the 4 Monmouthshire schools on there. I am happy to take any questions on the explanatory workshop, or I'm happy, Chair, to go into the report.
Thank you, Ed. That was very thorough, and I'm going to open the report for questions from members of the committee. So, who has a question?
I don't mind, Chair. If you want me to cover elements of the report, I can, or if you want to.
Would you feel that you want to go into the report as well, Councillor Strong? Yeah,
Okay.
you know, I'm assuming that people have read the report in detail, but you know, it's a matter. Yeah, it's a matter of whether or not you'd like to go into detail. But if you're comfortable, we go straight into questions. So, Councillor Bond.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for that explanation. Brilliant as always, and very complex for all of us. So looking at the results, it's so what really? So for me, so if we got King Henry the Seventh, and 8th was 6 out of 10 in the family. In 17, Caldecott was 6 out of 10 in that family, and Chepstow and Monmouth were 9 and 10 out of 10 in that family. What does that mean? Is that acceptable? That's the first question, please. And then there's improvements in, from what I understand, if I'm reading it correctly, there's improvements in Caldecott schools improved over the last 2 years, academic years, in many areas. And perhaps there's a explanation, or there's some sort of information you can give us, obviously not personal or confidential, as to why, whether there's any significant learning we can get from that, and also, and hopefully it'll continue the same way. And Monmouth obviously has got some issues, and maybe in literacy, numeracy and science, if I'm reading it correctly, and if you could give us any indication as to why and what is happening. And I guess also, is there any learning from the improvements and other schools that are higher in each of these families that we could apply? I guess that you're working on that, and the directorate looking at that all the time. I just wonder if there's any general trends or indications that you could share with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. And Ed, yes.
I can't hear anything, sorry.
Apologies,
Just ask again.
hadn't turned
Thank
my
you.
mic. apologies for lack of clarity on 3.13, in that doesn't in any way describe the performance of those schools and where they are. It gives the position within the family. So if we look at family number 17, which has got King Henry in, it means that that is roughly in the middle of the family by those indicators in terms of the context. So if you look at this is perhaps more interesting. At the bottom of that overleaf on page 4, Chepstow and Monmouth are the least disadvantaged families in that family. They're almost in the least disadvantaged in Wales. In terms of where schools are, it is littered throughout the report, but I think the most interesting one is to turn to 3.21. So 3.21 gives us a broad feel of where our schools are in terms of the CAP 9. In terms of the different sets of learners that it serves. The chart that is above it actually gives the same data as the table below, if that makes sense, but you can actually see the distance that they are. If I look at our 4 red dots, I'm not going to name the schools, but you can see from the least disadvantaged 2 on the left, very similar to the next, to the 4. For our most able learners, every single school in Monmouthshire performs above expectation, and that's contextualized as well. So they are all performing above expectation. It isn't because of the catchments that they serve, the communities they serve, they perform above expectation. For the middle third, and this is the yellowy dots, for want of a better, to name them accurately, the amber dots. Again, 3 of our schools above expectation, 1 very close, but fractionally below. The variance occurs, but we still have 3 of our schools in Monmouthshire performing above expectation for our least able learners as well, and 1 slightly below. That's the challenge, to be getting that school, and it is labeled. I'm not going to name schools, but you can see them written down in the report. What that is shown in the table below is the red bars. You will notice predominantly blue bars for the model difference for the upper third and the middle third, fractionally below for one, and then the distance below for the other. For a school that does have, that's that school's challenge, if that makes sense. In terms of your broader questions about the work that goes on, the work that goes on with schools is started by the local authority and the local authority school improvement service in September through our school improvement partners, who will be going in and asking the questions on the data of the whys. I don't include the whys in those report. I would hope to see those whys reported by school leaders to governing bodies of the detail of the individual subjects beyond the numeracy, math, science, reported to governing bodies, so we know the rationale for why there may be dips, improvements over time, variations. We know that a history department could have a long-term absence that could impact on results within 1 year, even though schools take measures to reduce that. That work also goes on in networks of sharing practice, so that schools that do have the higher results, not just in Monmouthshire, but across the partnership, share what they do, so that the other schools and other teachers within departments can learn from that. I hope I've answered the majority of your questions there, Councillor Bond, but happy to unpick further.
Councillor Bond, any follow-ups?
Yes, please. Yeah, thank you very much for the explanation. And sorry, I got it mixed up, but I think a lot of us did. So really and truly, the statement of where we are within what is expected of us, and you pointed out, so those are the biggest messages. The variation is greatest in the bottom third, but how do we, as scrutiny, that's all well and good and lovely, and thank you very much for all that, but the why, can we have some input from our education colleagues as to the whys? I understand that some of it might be, as I say, confidential, but some of it might be general learning that would be useful to us all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Some very useful comments on that. And Councillor Strong.
Sorry, could I have the answer? Could I have an answer, please?
Asking for a further response.
One element, and this is where the All Wales core data sets are published, and they include every learner within the school. To provide some context, Monmouth Comprehensive does have a special needs provision within that school as well, and all learners are included in those outcomes as well. So that would explain at the lowest performing third why there would be a difference there potentially.
Thank you very much for that explanation again for the facts, but I'm after the why, or the what general learning. So you've shared that in governors and in schools and in forums that it's discussed, but can you please give some indication as to learning from the ups and downs, not yourself but the education directorate? Thank you.
Will?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Bond, for your question. I think it's difficult for us to be able to report back to you in a way which I think at the level of detail which you clearly want, and there's nothing wrong with wanting that level of detail, but in a way which maintains and sustains the approach to data that Wales has decided to take. So it would be, Wales has decided for a whole set of reasons that the data that we collect should be used in a way that means that people understand the performance of schools, but that it should not be used in a means by which we could kind of hold people for account or hold people to account. And I'm not suggesting that you're indicating that's what you want. The whys and the wherefores for performance variability year on year in schools are complex and many. For instance, a school, as Ed alluded to at the outset, could change its curriculum. That change in curriculum could mean that the CAP 9 score was higher because of the nature of qualifications that pupils were being entered for. Schools could focus, Ed didn't make the point this year, but the biggest jump that you can make in terms of points attainment is between no grade and a G grade, which is 16, I think. So if a school was to really focus on its learners who were going to achieve nothing, but then achieve a G grade, it would have a disproportionate impact on its CAP 9 than other schools. Within that, there will be all the variability of how children have adapted to learning and teaching through the course of the year, and how they have performed on the day in those qualifications. It's really, this is our, I guess, as MCC reporting back to you the outcomes of all of our schools. It's not about us giving account of what has happened in each of the schools. If that is something that the committee would wish to do, I think we would have to think quite carefully about how we do that, and just to make sure that it doesn't fall out of line with the expectations of Welsh Government and other agencies in terms of how we report and use the data that is available.
Sorry, Chair, can I just come back to that? So you're suggesting then that in this format, that because there's so many variables, it's meaningless for a comparison and to drill down to find out what the issues are, and that would be you'd have to take another route in to find out what those were. Am I getting that right?
I think I'm not suggesting for one moment that that the questions that you're asking are not the right questions to be asking. And it's right when you look at the performance of the schools, why schools have performed in a certain way against their comparatives and the regression line for Wales. To get to the detail of why a school has performed in a certain way in a given year is more problematic and would require a lot more detail than is shared in any kind of format in any local authority in Wales. So I think what we're holding at the moment is a line that's been agreed, certainly between the 4 authorities who are part of the Local Authority School Improvement Service, and probably more detail than other parts of Wales receive at all. So we need to be careful in the line that we hold in terms of that information.
Ed, I think you were trying to come in.
Just to add briefly to Will's point, I think this report is trying to give the big holistic picture rather than dig into the detail of individual schools. You'll notice at the start I alluded to the fact that the All Wales core data set for an individual school is 120 pages. Now, I would expect individual schools leadership to analyse that report, present that to governors, and probably give you a detailed report of about, at least 10 pages themselves of what's gone in individual school. We don't include that in this report because it is for the governing bodies to hold that to account on the detail. If I look at the variance over time as well, I'm briefly going to return to 3.27, if I may, in the report. It's the literacy measure. It does give two tables compared with the family average, and you will see that the variance, if you look at Caldecott, that was, I've got to put my glasses on, -3 points below last year, moved to -1 point below this year. What does that mean? Yeah, is the big question, isn't it? What does that -3 to 3 mean? What it means was that last year, every learner was half a GCSE grade below the expectation of the family in the school. This year, they've moved to 1/6 of a grade below, so they've closed that gap quite significantly, is what I would say. It does tend to bring it into light more when you put it in terms of GCSE grades rather than points, and that's that point that 6 plus or minus 6 point is a whole GCSE grade for every learner. To unpick the why and how they Caldecott have done that probably is 10 pages of detail behind that, which is for the school to know and to present to their governing bodies, and the governing bodies to hold them to account, but also our school improvement partners to hold the leadership to account as well. But not necessarily, as Will says, for scrutiny, the detail of all of that, given the current climate.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for the questions and the responses on that. And Councillor Strong.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, bit of similarity in a way with my question, in that it's dealing with the what happened and the why. Yeah, but I'm not going to drill into the why. And this relates to pupils who leave at the end of Key Stage 4 with no qualifications at all. Now, clearly the numbers are very low. In percentage terms, it's 0% through to 1.9%, which means we're dealing with 1, 2, 3, maybe maximum 4 pupils in any year. And we couldn't go into why in this report, I think, because with it being such a small number, you could identify individuals, which would not be beneficial to anybody. And I've no doubt the schools are absolutely aware of the whys. Yep. What I want to ask from here, though, and this is really for Will rather than Ed, is those pupils are leaving at 16, I'm assuming. Do we properly track them post 16 so that we can use what the school knows about the why and use that information to assist them further, perhaps by taking them through the Inspire programme or whatever?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Strong. Yeah, of course, these are the cohort, I suspect, of learners who have the greatest risk of becoming NEET, so not in education, employment or training. We have an early identification tool, actually, that begins at year 6 for those children who are, we believe through the identification of a series of indicators, may well become NEET later in their careers in school. So we do track them, and through the Inspire project, which again, really pleasingly was funded through the budget last week, we will be able to retain the Inspire workers in school to make sure that we understand where those learners are. And we do that in collaboration with Careers Wales as well. So it's at both parts to understand where they go to afterwards, their destinations and what's happening, and to make sure we can continue to support them once they finish in school, if we can.
Councillor Strong?
Right, yeah, that's really good to hear, that tracking from year 6 onwards. Yeah, I'm just wondering, if we're tracking pupils, we're still getting pupils, it looks like, getting into courses where they end up with an F or a G at GCSE. I'm just wondering if, if any of those, or do those pupils, do you think, come out at the end feeling that that 2-year course was a positive experience for them? Or should our tracking be able to guide them perhaps into something that they would find a more positive experience? Obviously, that depends upon the breadth of the curriculum that a school can offer, how much vocational work and that sort of thing.
I think, and Ed made the point earlier in his presentation, it's really important that schools design curriculum which are reflective of children's needs. That's the most important thing, that children right across the ability spectrum have the ability to access courses and qualifications that are relevant and appropriate to them. So you'll see that, I'm sure in Ed's paper, there's an indicator which reflects the number of GCSEs or alternative qualifications that are included in the CAP9. That's the type of thing where you expect to see schools flex their approaches to make sure that everybody's accessing something which is purposeful for them and will allow them to go on and to do something. And that's the type of thing, as Ed has alluded to, that we discuss with schools in their professional discussions. So they take place in the autumn term. We'll have had sight of the school's own analysis of their summer examination outcomes. We'll sit down with the schools. We'll talk about what were your outcomes? Were they in line with your expectations? Were they in line with our expectations? How do we think things have gone? And do we think that that's a fair reflection on where we expected the school to be? So it's all part of that discussion. And certainly in a number of our schools, the focus on making sure that the curriculum and the qualification offer is appropriate to all learners is a key focus of that discussion.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, we had head teachers at our last meeting from secondary schools, and they did give us some reassurance that the new curriculum gives an element of flexibility. Obviously, we're coming up to Welsh Government elections, and that might have an impact upon the flexibility of the curriculum. I would just personally appeal more flexibility that schools have, the better.
I think the only other aspect to that around flexibility, we'll also see the introductions of the vocational CSEs. That's right, isn't it? The VCSEs. Yes. So those will actually provide a different dimension completely within the secondary schools for schools to think about how they make that offer.
Thanks. Well, thanks, Councillor Strong. And moving on to Councillor Buckler.
Thank you, Chair. Have I got it right?
You're on.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Ed. You do say that, you know, this is a holistic picture, but it very much raises questions which you cannot help but explore or think of. So the report shows that whilst overall outcomes are above the Welsh average, there is a clear variation between individual schools, with some measures significantly below modelled outcomes. So it leads us to think, what are we doing to ensure that strongest practice in our highest performing schools is consistently applied through all secondary schools? You know, this could include things like teaching approaches, curriculum design, as mentioned by Councillor Strong, leadership practices, and subject performance. You know, the fact that there's significant variation in schools, you know, in science, 2 schools are below the modelled outcomes, one significantly so. And bearing in mind, science is one of the key indicators of a good outcome later life in the working environment. That seems very important. And are we relying on our stronger schools to mask weaker performance elsewhere? You know, are we doing enough to consider that and help where outcomes are weaker? So does it, you know, are we suggesting that inconsistent teaching quality or leadership is across the schools, and, you know, are we doing something about it? Very much concerned about weak performance amongst lowest attaining pupils, again, as mentioned by Councillor Strong. We know how critical it is that we try and circumvent as many young people becoming NEETs as possible. So why is this, and, you know, why are weaker pupils falling behind, and what can we do to help that? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Buckler.
I think, yeah, I think it does go back to an important point that the journey doesn't start now when we're analysing this. It starts in September and across the autumn term with dialogue. It didn't just start last September, it started in the years before as well. The first point is dialogue with school leaders through the school improvement partner, through colleagues in the local authority, where this data, the early stages of this data, will be analysed early to have that dialogue and that challenge. I do include in the front of this paper, so I didn't go through it, but there are a range of questions that are under in the context section on 3.4 of that conversation, of the highlights of what would happen, the weaknesses, the areas, the subjects that are that have underperformed in relation to professional expectations. That's the start. The second stage then is the leadership deciding what the priorities are in terms of their school development plan. So that if science is a weakness, we make sure that the head of science is going to every network meeting, the relevant courses, the relevant professional learning, the relevant events put on by other schools where they share their best practice. So we are sharing. It is certainly not about the aspirations of just one school and the best. It is the aspirations of all of our schools through sharing, learning from others that we support in terms of the challenge, first of all, that is from our school improvement partners to school leaders, the challenge that comes from governing bodies as well, but then the provision of support that lays behind that with the breadth of opportunities to work with others. I don't know whether...
I think, Chair, if I could just add one point to it with regard to the science, and I think you're right to identify that, Councillor Buckler. I think we've seen, the one school who in 2024 were at 4.8 points, so coming up to a grade per child, improve their position to 2.3 points, and we've seen one school move away from almost matching the family average to being half a grade below it. And with regard to the weak performance of all learners, I think you were citing in the thirds, there is one school which is beneath the modelled expectation. And that is, well, it's just about on the line for the middle third, and it is beneath the line by a greater distance for the lower third. So I think when we're talking about weak practice, I think I'd just hold in your mind that of those 12 points of measurement, there is one measure which is below the line and the other 11 are all on or above the line. So in terms of balance, I think that's how I would just reflect on that.
Councillor Buckler?
So, well, are you content that the processes in place are strong enough from what you're saying, and which is very illuminating, and thank you. But do you think they're good enough, and do you think we're on the right path?
I think my expectations of our school and our schools are always to be at the very, very highest that they can be. We've seen progress over time, and I think towards the end of Ed's paper, where things are aggregated to a local authority level, you can see the progress that has been made year on year and the differential between our position. And it's about our position because it's about the progress that we make and not comparing us back to the Welsh average, as might have been the risk in the past. So it's about the progress that we're able to make year on year. That's the critical point. I think in terms of the processes, I'm party to those discussions with the head teachers. I understand, their disappointments and their and conversely, when they're very pleased about the outcomes that they achieve in their schools. I see that. I also know the level of questioning and challenge that goes into those sessions, because we want to see the schools perform better and better every single year. The other point that I would reflect, and I think Ed and I have had discussions around that, the lines which you see on these papers, I think modelled, expected, difficult language. That's simply a line of regression amongst Wales's performance. Our expectations should be as high as that cohort of children can possibly achieve. We're inevitably using that line of measurement against how well Wales has done. And our ambitions for our learners should be to be at the very, very top of their performance every single year. So we will continue with our expectations that our schools, from when they start in school, because this is the GCSE year 11 is the culmination of 11 years of education. It doesn't happen in year 11. It happens as soon as you start in nursery, reception, all the way through. So we have to make sure that our system is working really effectively to make sure that the value, the teaching and the learning that those children experience means that our schools perform exceptionally every single summer.
Thank you. And moving on to Councillor Pavia.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just wanted to sort of dig deeper a little bit on the attainment gap between those pupils eligible for free school meals and those who are not. And it seems from the data that there is a gap emerging between those most disadvantaged pupils in the county compared to those who are not, particularly in 2025, and just seeing that the CAP 9 scores fallen, and it's now marginally below the Wales FSM free school meals average for the first time, while the non-FSM score seems to have risen quite sharply. And just obviously, you know, it does directly sit probably quite uncomfortably in terms of the tension between the authority stated equity agenda and where the data seems to be going. So just wondered if, you know, the cabinet member or officers can explain what is driving this divergence and what targeted interventions are being put in place for those pupils eligible for free school meals. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Pavia.
Just to start on the data element, to start with, it is worth noting that that chart is truncated. So it starts at 200 points, it finishes at 500 points. What that has the effect of, these are Welsh Government supplied, what that has the effect of doing is making very small changes actually look bigger than they are. The difference, and the free school meals in Wales has gone up. It has fallen slightly in Monmouthshire, which is not what we want. But the actual difference is 2 points when you look at that chart, which is the equivalent to about a 30th of a GCSE per learner. So the changes are quite small because of the truncation of that chart. It's also a challenge that has been around for 25 years in terms of that aspiration to improve the outcomes for our free school meal learners. We know that our schools are well aware of the tracking systems that they have, and this starts at age 5 and onwards in our schools, and earlier of the identification of those learners. It remains a challenge that the core of it is the provision within an individual classroom, and that provision within an individual classroom will affect all learners. I can test back to the original part that it is about how you do for your least able learners that will impact positively, and it certainly won't impact on the most able if you're putting that provision in incorrectly. Most of our schools, well, all of our schools will have complex tracking systems, and by tracking systems, I just don't mean the data, I mean the conversations, the wraparound, the pastoral, the well-being support for all of those learners that they will need. We know that many of our learners will, unless they are collected on the day before, and sorry, not many, some of our learners, particularly the most vulnerable, where they are not collected by a teacher in a minibus before the day before an examination, will not necessarily turn up for that examination because they won't have the strength of support around at home to enable that. Schools will literally on the day of some exams be driving to get certain learners in to sit those examinations. Those are the lens that they will go to in terms of the care and support that they provide, and they know the learners that need that on the day. That was just one of the elements that I wanted to talk about beyond the data.
I think the other thing, and again, you know, it's a relentless area of questioning and focus when we speak to schools, the use of their pupil development grants. You know, how do you use that to best effect to improve the outcomes for this cohort? And of course, as we'll hear in a little bit, you know, the impact of attendance. So the whole piece is all joined together, Councillor Pavia. I know you understand and know that. So it's a key focus for us. It has been, as exactly as Ed said, a long-standing challenge for both us and all of Wales, and in England as well. It's it is a challenge to close that gap. It remains the key focus for us, but it is an area that we have to kind of maintain that focus on.
Councillor Pavi, did you want to come back on that? Thank you, and thank you for those questions. May I just, as we are wrapping up this particular report, which is just so important, you know, we all have the same ambition that our schools are as good as they can be. We want the best outcomes for our young people in Wales and Monmouthshire, and yet we are looking at families of schools within the context, a broader context of Wales, which it's difficult to actually see how we are performing in that broader context. Wales is approximately 4.5% of the United Kingdom, are roughly the same size as Greater Manchester. So if people in parents and young people in Greater Manchester were told we're only going to be able to look at how you're performing one part of Greater Manchester against another, as opposed to the rest of the United Kingdom, it'd be a huge concern. And it does strike me that parents, learners, and the sheer competitivity of Wales needs to be able to say, how are we doing compared to, at the very least, the rest of the United Kingdom? We are, as I repeat, about 4.5% of the population. And so all that our parents and learners have got is the PISA reports, which come out every few years. The most recent one was about 2 years ago. And it stated that in the very areas that we're looking at, which are math, science, and literacy, Wales in all three of those areas is below the average for all the OECD countries that are listed. And it particularly comments on Wales having one of the sharpest declines of all the countries that are ranked. So my question is, what do we say to those parents and those learners about actually how our schools are performing when that is about the only information they've got to tell them about our relative performance compared to, well, other countries, including those in the United Kingdom, and that they're seeing that report is saying that we are the lowest performing by some distance on all those three core subject areas in the United Kingdom, apart from in the OECD. What would you say to those parents?
I think the most important thing we can do is to make sure that the schools that we support and work with in Monmouthshire are ready to provide the children and young people who attend them with the very best education that they can receive. We are a Welsh local authority, as we stated earlier. We work within Wales, we work to the education system and structures that exist within Wales. That means that the Welsh Government, as a devolved matter, has taken some choices and decisions about education, about our qualifications processes that are different to England, in the same way that Scotland has, in the same way that we see a different GCSE regime in Northern Ireland as well, because they are devolved to those nations. In fact, Scotland does actually have a different form of examination. So we have to and can only look at the authorities and the schools who undertake the same examinations as we take. As we've mentioned in this committee before, in England, the GCSE structure is done differently. So there are 9 grades available in England, as opposed to the 8 grades available in Wales. So there is a structural difference about how we look at things. And it's that piece about understanding that differential. The point of the next step, if it be A levels, that is maintained the same way across both England and Wales. And we've seen that Wales's performance at Key Stage 5 and at A level has seen an increase in the highest grades in Wales compared to England. So that gives us a degree of confidence that what children are beginning Key Stage 5 with is suitable for them to be able to perform at that level. I think in the future, I think it would be helpful for us to bring a report to this committee around Key Stage 5, because I think that would be of interest to everybody, and it is at that comparable level which the committee wants to see and would like to see, and I think would show our schools in a very positive way in terms of how they perform at Key Stage 5. So I think it's that piece around our commitment to continuing to provide the very best education we can. We are in the structure and the system that we are in. We measure ourselves against similar schools. That is entirely the appropriate thing to do. It wouldn't be appropriate to compare ourselves to schools that were wildly different or the Welsh average. It's appropriate to compare ourselves to schools which have similar levels of free school meals, additional learning needs, and English as an acquired language. So we're comparing like with like within our system, and I think that's all we can do in a meaningful and transparent way for our communities.
Thank you, Will. Yeah, my question was really, what do we say to parents and learners when the only comparative information that they've got are the PISA tables, where I'm sure every country in the OECD, the dozens of countries, can argue they have different exam boards. If that's the only information that parents and learners can see in comparative terms, my question was, how do we explain to them that actually Wales is actually doing a really good job and our outcomes are, really at the very best that we can achieve?
So I think there are some questions around the nature of the examination in PISA. It does test things slightly differently to the way GCSEs are tested, but that will be the same for everybody. But everyone's educational approaches will be slightly different. So we know that some of the countries who do very well in PISA have a very, very different approach to education than we do, particularly some in the Far East are exceptionally different approaches to the way in which we teach and the things in which we value in Wales and in other parts of the United Kingdom. So I think PISA is obviously reported on a national basis, so it's reported on a Wales-wide basis, not on a local authority level. So we will wait and see now. I think the next set of PISA tests is coming up. Yeah, going to be sat. Published in November. Thank you, Ed. So we will see at that point if there's been an improvement in the system based on the reforms and the changes that we've seen within the Welsh system.
Thanks, Will, and appreciate that. So I see no other hands. So this is a report for us to note and to receive. And it's been, I think, absolutely properly received and some very interesting questions and discussions around it. So thank you very much indeed for that. And as ever, our hearts and our aims are to support and to see the ambition that we all have for our schools to come through in every child, and that every single child has the best of opportunities coming out of our schools. We're moving on to item 6. I'm just going to open it to members. Would you like to continue but take a break, a comfort break if you personally need to before the end of the meeting, or would you like to take a 5-minute break for everybody at this point before we move on to item 6? I'm just looking for any indication. Would you rather the former, we continue and just take a comfort break if you need it, or we continue? I'm seeing some, okay, I'm seeing some continuing hand motions. I think emojis, as they're probably called nowadays. So if we continue with the meeting, if that's acceptable to colleagues, please, if you need to take a comfort break, do so, and we'll carry on. Okay, thank you, and thanks. We're going to move on to the school attendance report, item 6, scrutinising the latest figures in school attendance. And welcome, Sarah. Could you just introduce yourself, please, as you start the summary?
Good morning, everyone. Sharon Randall-Smith, Head of Service for Achievement and Attainment. I've come this morning to talk to you about school attendance for the academic year 24-25. So that is the end of the last academic year. I know that I've spoken to some members before at the last meeting about some aspects of the work of the team that I lead, which is the Education Welfare Service. And I thought it was worthwhile sharing this with you to put the attendance part of that work into context. So our educational welfare service consists of one of our leads. We cover EHE, which is elective home education. We have a team of EWS officers, 4.6 equivalent, and 4 family liaison officers. And they work within the local authority directly with schools and with families and with pupils. But we also work very closely with our inclusion service, because attendance doesn't sit on its own. It's a service that involves all of us having a very positive input within the work that we do. So it's really a three-way partnership between ourselves as an EWS service, schools, and the inclusion service, with our children and pupils and families in the centre, and then wrapped around by wider services. And it's really important that we understand that attendance itself can't be achieved and improved without everybody working together to support the children and the pupils in the best way that we can. So the role of the Education Welfare Service is to work with schools, as I said. They look at attendance patterns and advise on safeguarding issues. Regarding the monitoring of attendance, every consultation, every fortnightly with secondary schools, and every half term, at least with primary schools, reviews the registers and pupils causing concern. On a half-termly basis, we collate the attendance information and share it with all head teachers so that we can see across a range of measures. So, for example, primary schools for all pupils, FSM, persistent absence, ALN. So it's a comprehensive range, and we can measure and track progress against every school at every point. And as I say, we share that. We check our official registers. We support and advise on school attendance, strategies and procedures. We look at the data, support pupils and parents, reintegration into school after a period of absence, which is incredibly important for learners. Comprehensive range of family engagement support, that is visits to the home, but not just that. We can signpost parents to additional help and support. If there are challenges to transport to schools, for example, we can help and support with that. And that area of the work is very well reported on and was identified in Eston. We liaise and work with a wide range of services and agencies, most predominantly with our inclusion services. And we regulate child employment and chaperone licenses and discharge duties in relation to children missing in education, as we discussed at the last meeting, and provide regular attendance training to schools and leaders. And that work is quite comprehensive throughout all of our schools. Just a general overview. Undoubtedly, regular school attendance has a positive impact on learners and young people, and it has a real strong impact on their outcomes. If they're not in school, they're not going to learn and they're not going to achieve their potential. One of the key things for schools, for us, is to ensure, as we said earlier, that schools have a strong curriculum offer and children feel that they are welcomed into school, and their parents, that the schools have good relationships with parents. One of the things that they need to do also to support that is to have strong systems and processes to ensure when things go wrong, they can be put right as quickly as possible. Extended absence from schools can affect learners' mental health and, as I've said, long-term life chances, and it's not something we can consider in isolation. Whole school and strong multi-agency working practices are central to ensuring those high levels of attendance. If schools have explored all of their avenues, and so have we as a local authority, then there are other places that we need to go as well. So that work doesn't stop. And schools have a key role themselves to support learners in developing that sense of belonging, connectivity and engagement with schools. The most recent guidance from Welsh Government was belonging, engaging and participating, and central to that is where the school has their most significant role. So I thought I would share the attendance of pupils in all secondary schools per school. This is, as I said, the end of the academic year 24-25. So when Eston came to visit, this would be the last point that they actually saw when they came into school into our authority to inspect us. However, things change all the time. So this is the end of the cumulative year, and for secondary schools that ends at the end of half terms, because pupils are sitting exams or they're in and out of schools for that last half term, and therefore it wouldn't necessarily be a fair comparison, because that might change from school to school. So as you can see, we have 3 schools which are above the Wales average and 1 which is below, which is Caldecott. Significant amount of work has been from the team focused into supporting Caldecott in order to improve their attendance systems and processes. And whilst it does show an improving trend, it's still not where we need to be. And when we think about where is this at this point in the term, it has increased significantly now. So it's just below 90%. It's 89.34%. And the reason it didn't quite make 90% was because you may recall sometime in November, there was a day where pupils were unable to go to school because the weather was so poor. Buses were not able to get to pupils to take them into the school, and therefore that had a significant impact on their attendance. And it takes a long time through the year for that to make a positive difference. At this point of the year, all of our, with the exception of Caldecott, which we've explained, all of our secondary schools now are above 90% at this point of the year. So you can see that there is significant work going on, and that we are seeing that ongoing and improving trend. A very small increase in attendance takes a huge amount of work, a huge amount of investment in time. And really pleased to see that all of our schools as a collective will be 90.72% in secondary, but all of the schools across all 3 schools will be 90% above for all pupils. We also look at FSM pupils. And as you can see again, we've got 2 schools which are just above, 1 just below. At the end of 24-25, Caldecott again was below for the attendance of free school meals pupils. That is a key focus for us as a team, and in all our consultations we look at FSM attendance, and we discuss with schools the strategies that are in place and how they're tracking those pupils. Again, it has improved at this point in the year, so we've seen improvements in all of the schools, and overall now we've seen an improvement in attendance across the schools compared to Wales. So we are in a, again, much stronger position. If I go to attendance of all pupils in secondary school, the graph is a little different in this particular case because we tried to include as many schools as possible. It was difficult to put it in a report, but it's easier to see it here. And you will see that there's the average across Monmouthshire is 93.8%, and we've got a lot of schools well above that. All 70% of our schools are above the All Wales average, and where they are not, there are reasons. So for some of our schools, the numbers are very, very small within that, the group which is below, or they have potentially an SRB, and but overall, every single primary school for all pupils is over 90%. So, which is again a great improvement, and the overarching current position is 94.4% for our pupils as an average. So we are now at the target that we set for primaries in our corporate plan. FSM pupils, slightly different picture. And again, we can see that we have around about 60% of our schools above the Wales average. Where they are lower, again, we are looking at some very small numbers in some of those schools, and very small schools as well. But progress since the last, and we've seen progress since that we have seen more progress, and now the lowest performance for FSM attendance in primary schools is 84.9%, and the highest is 95.48%. So we are making huge. We are making steps slowly and surely, building on improvements over time. Okay.
Sharon, I was just looking for an indication whether you've drawn to a conclusion or...
Yes, I have, yes.
Sorry,
Any
thank you. I thought you were
questions?
doing one of those great dramatic pauses before you did a big reveal.
I was going to sneeze, actually, so.
Right, well done, well timed in that case.
No.
And thank you for that. Thank you for taking us through some really important information. So I'm going to open your report for questions. And Councillor Buckler, you are first on your hand up.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sharon. Very interesting results, and it's encouraging to see that primary schools have such an uplift in attendance, which is always seems to me that if you get it right at primary level, then there's much more chance at secondary level of continuing that. One thing that sort of struck me, particularly since the pandemic, are the numbers of homeschool pupils. And do you ever have this concern that there are homeschool pupils who are actually being educated rather than just being kept at home? You know, has this arisen, and is it something that that we need to be concerned about? There does seem to be, a concern and a gap between free school meal pupils in that is of concern on their attendance levels. I know we're pretty good, but if are there levels of concern that and could we put interventions in place to stop that sliding further? So if you could answer that, would be very kind.
Thank you, Councillor Buckler. Sharon.
Sorry. Thank you for your question. We do have a number of pupils across the local authority, or families and children who are electively home educated, currently standing at 192 across the authority. There are lots of systems and processes in place in order to ensure that those particular children are having a suitable education. I think we need to be mindful that it's elective home education, so there's no need for it to replicate the education that you would see within school, as long as it is a suitable education and is allowing those children to build the relevant skills that they need for when they actually leave school, and so they can participate and achieve their potential. We have an elective home education officer who visits the school, visits families regularly, and provides a great deal of support to make sure that we have regular contact with them as we need to through our legal responsibilities, and that that the education that they are being delivered, receiving at home, is suitable. If on the rare occasion that's not the case, we do have the option to issue a school attendance order, and we haven't had to do that in the last 4 years, but we obviously do consider it if we do have any concerns. But there are no, we are confident that children are learning appropriately when they're in when they're elective home education. And with regard to your second question about the gap in FSM and non-FSM, definitely within secondary schools, it's an area of priority and somewhere that we focused our work. The gap is sort of 12.2% between primary and secondary, between secondary FSM and non-FSM, which is above the gap across Wales. However, in primaries, it's 5.5 percentage points, which is lower than across Wales. We have to be careful sometimes when you talk about gaps. If you've seen improvements in pupils who are non-FSM, and there's been a big improvement there, the gap might widen, but you might be seeing sort of improvements across both. It just depends with the gap. But monitoring how that number is going up and how the percentage of FSM pupils attending regularly is increasing is a good indication as well. The gap is important, and it is, as I said, for our conversations with schools, particularly with secondaries, it is always something we will talk about at an individual pupil level, and to determine that, that what those barriers to learning are, and whether we, how we can help and support.
Thank you, Sharon. Just as a sort of matter of interest, the officer who goes to homeschool pupils on a regular basis, which I'm sure is vital and a great support to the families that are home educating their children. Is there any, are there any sort of subjects that you make the point, of course, that they don't follow the curriculum, and there's a lot more to education than following a sort of set curriculum. I get that, but are there particular concerns that tend to come up that it's interesting or useful to take note of, as in gaps in education?
Thank you for your question. Because it is elective home education, there is no curriculum, but our expectations would be that children learning at home would be able to read, they would be able to write, they would develop their literacy and communication skills, they would develop their numeracy skills, their sense of inquiry and exploration, opportunities to develop their science skills through the planned activities that parents provide for them. There is a lot of support in the area where parents obviously sometimes share resources. Parents use lots of the days that we put on to develop skills as well. So we offer a number of sessions where pupils can come together and look at craft, creativity and activities, but there isn't anything that we can say would be that would be a concern, because the curriculum that they're following isn't a curriculum that we would be seeing and having delivered in school, and that's the point of elective home education. They do have a lot of other experiences. They don't have to follow a school day. They don't have to follow a school pattern, and in some cases families do, strangely enough. They start school and they have that as the way they organize their day, but it is very flexible, and how they deliver the curriculum is very flexible as well. So, but our visits just confirm that it's suitable and pupils are making the progress we would expect within literacy, numeracy, and those wider subjects.
Yes, Buckler?
Thank you very much. It's an interesting subject.
It certainly is. And Councillor Strong.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Actually, we did have recently a quite detailed discussion. Was it on this committee? It was on this committee. So anybody who is interested in that interesting subject, I want to track down the recording of that, because it was a thorough discussion, and it was very reassuring. And a lot of very good work being done in that field. But on to my questions. First of all, a question about what I might call sporadic absence. This is particularly sort of holiday absence. Not long ago, maybe a year or two back, more than that probably, there were a lot of publicity about fines for that sort of absence, and we've had references in the report to punitive measures and prosecution. Is that sort of system still in place? And if so, how much discretion is given to head teachers in terms of recording and reporting that? It seems to me it's quite important that there is a degree of discretion there. Then my second question is about the persistent absence feature. And I note that the measure for that has been taken down from 20% to 10%. Now, that presumably is orders from Welsh Government to measure it that way. It seems to me that 20% is still an important measure. I mean, it's 1 day a week. If you're missing 1 day a week, that's going to be really problematic. So the question arises from that is, do you still have the capacity, and would you find it useful to collect the 20% alongside of the 10% that you presumably have to collect for reports to Welsh Government. Yep. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Strong. And Sharon.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions. Yeah, sporadic attendance can be a challenge, and as you say, holidays in term time. It is at the discretion of the head teacher to determine whether they will authorise a holiday in term time or not. Our advice would always be that you wouldn't authorise unless the circumstances were exceptional. And there are some exceptions which we would all understand. It's something that we are looking to work with clusters, because the understanding of what those exceptions are needs to be common between the primary group and the secondary group. Otherwise, that causes difficulties for parents, for the pupils, and for ourselves and schools. We haven't issued any fines for fixed penalty notices, as they would be, for parents who've taken their children out of school. However, it is always something that we come back to regularly to be able to think, is it right and proper and appropriate? And I think, our discussions recently are, we still are not issuing fixed penalty notices, but we may look at it in certain groups where we're seeing sort of figures coming through where we're thinking, well, that's really not appropriate now, and maybe we do need to think about that. So that's where our conversations are going. Punitive measures, don't always make a difference. In fact, they probably don't make any at all. The difference is between the authorised and unauthorised absence, because if a school is authorising absence, then they are agreeing. If it's unauthorised and then attendance declines, then that's where we're involved. Okay, so if we look at the persistent absence, yes, the change between 20% and 10% has been quite significant. However, I would say overall, whilst we saw a spike initially, it has now declined and it's dropping positively and appropriately across both primary and secondary. But as a service, we actually track 10%, 20%, 30, 40, we go down to 70%. So we track those regularly with our schools so that we know where we are and we can see the groups of pupils and where their attendance is, depending on that percentage. So, we do have a good understanding and a good idea about that, and we know where those pupils are and what the work is around them.
Councillor Strong?
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to see the holiday absences are under constant review, because there definitely are circumstances when it is justified, but yeah, they would be exceptional. Yeah, and again, glad on the 20% as well as the 10%. There was some strange wording in the report. I can't find it now, which sort of seemed to say there's less persistent absenteeism, which, well, if you take it down to 10%, yes, it would, but the wording wasn't very helpful on that. I think Councillor Bond might have the wording on that. She drew attention to it. Yeah.
It's at 3.1, and it actually says with attendance below 20%. Does it mean 80% or absence below 20%, changing to below 10%? It's 3.1 is a little bit confusing. I think the word attendance was there instead of absence. Thank you.
Okay, that point's noted, and I think it's been well made. The fact that you continue to collect the 20% and even higher percentages, Sharon, whilst you may not be able to make comparison with other local authorities, it would be, I think, useful in future reports to see how we're progressing within Monmouthshire on that. Is it actually improving or not? Because that clearly could be very important.
Yeah, absolutely. We can share that.
Great. So I'm going to move on to Councillor Garrett.
Thank you for the report. I was just curious about whether there was any trends within particular year groups, that whether you drill down and look at that, because the report obviously focuses on the whole picture. So are there any, do you look at any trends within particular groups to see whether there's any issues going on, especially within a particular school, for example? And in terms of what do you do when there's children that have been persistently absent? How are they brought back into the school, such as a phased approach or withdrawal to, let's say, a less intimidating classroom if they've got particular issues? And I just wondered as well whether there's a breakdown of authorised and unauthorised absence on the list as well. I've had children with medical issues, so they've occasionally had periods where they've been out of school for some time, and that can't be avoided. So are we keeping those kind of absences out of the attendance figures, or are they part of it as well? Okay, thank you. Cheers.
Thank you, Councillor Garrett. Sharon.
Thank you for your questions. With regard to year group trends, we do actually record that, we track that with schools. So when we have our consultations, there is a document which informs the discussion. So that will have the year group trends on there. It will have absences, which are authorised and unauthorised absence, so we can collect that. So we can see that per school. There are some trends. So if you look, primary trends per year group are usually much higher and more consistent. In the younger year groups, if there is some sort of bug or going around, they tend to be impacted a little bit more. If you look at secondary schools, usually year 7 is the highest, and it does tend to tail off a little bit as pupils move through the school. Again, there can be differences in year groups, particularly. Sometimes cohorts are different, and they will be consistently high throughout the whole of their school career. But we do track that very carefully. And because the EWOs know these schools incredibly well, they are able to then look back at their past records, and they monitor that alongside the schools. So as far as absence is concerned, if a pupil has had a short period of absence, then they would just go back to school normally. But if it's an extended period of absence, we work closely with our flows, who usually start that process with contact in the home with a family, and use trauma-informed approaches to be able to support that pupil back into school, whether that's in a phased return, whether that's as part of us working with the school and then the school taking responsibility. It really is very bespoke to each of the pupils, depending on what the challenge is at that particular time. But it is, it's the inclusion of flows in family liaison officers flows into the service has really helped that work quite significantly. And in your last question is around authorised and unauthorised absence. If the figures reflect, if you're in school and it's authorised, if you're not in school, it's unauthorised. So it's just that sort of clarity. But it does make a difference if schools are authorising and unauthorising absence, because of the reasons for that. So if you're authorising an absence, it's still going to be an absence, but as I said, it's supported and agreed by the school as being reasonable. If it's unauthorised, then it's something that will potentially lead to the service becoming involved with that pupil.
Thank you, Sharon. Councillor Garrett, you content?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you. And I'm moving across to Councillor Newell.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to colleagues for all their reports this morning. It's been fascinating listening and still part of my learning process. I think it's a great subject. I was trying to find in these reports about attendance, anecdotally, and also we had a meeting recently with a couple of local head teachers, that there seemed to be quite a big increase in exclusions from schools, whether it's suspensions, expulsions, etc. So my query is, I was just wondering, how are they reported, and are they included in this report? And if they're not included in this report, is there a way that Scrutiny can maybe get figures about how exclusion figures for pupils in all our schools are either going up or down, and the reasons for it? And I wonder whether that's another subject for another meeting, because I from what I hear, the numbers from my day of going to Monmouth Comprehensive School, the numbers being suspended compared to now is so much higher now. I just wondered if you could expand on that.
Thank you for your question. I believe that a report came very recently, which was detailing the exclusions. So the reasons that there are many reasons why pupils don't attend. It could be that it's exclusions. It could be that they're on that they have a reduced timetable. It could be that they have increased levels of social, emotional, mental health. as we talked the other day, earlier, it could be about the weather, could be flexi school arrangement, which is, very, very few numbers, but it could be that. The reasons that pupils are not in school vary, but yeah, definitely we've already reported on the exclusions rate to one of the committees very recently.
It was this committee on the 27th of January. So if anyone's looking and wants to really look into that, you'll be able to find some really useful information about permanent and temporary exclusions. So Sharon, thank you.
Okay. And so just to add to that as well, the information that we have from EWS team when they're checking registers will be shared with our colleagues who are dealing with exclusions, so that there's a complete join up between our work and their work, and we are all very clear that the figures are accurate, and that we know when they're returning back to school.
Thank you. Councillor Newell, are you content with that?
Yeah, that's great. Of course, I was in that meeting on the 27th of January where we had the head teachers there, and yeah, I'm glad that everything's being married together in all these reports. So so thanks again.
And finally, Councillor Bond.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the report. Really good information. So I was subbing for or deputising for the People's Scrutiny, which was about children missing education and home education, and then the P&O, of course, was on the 21st of the 1st. Sorry, that was earlier, but then on the 21st to 27th of the 1st, we had the school exclusion, and then health research network information, which was brilliant as well. Thank you for that. So the reasons you've just given again, thank you very much, were about behaviour, social, emotional, mental health, other trauma, perhaps ACEs, perhaps other situations which are reasons for young people, children and young people not attending school. And I wondered, I understand that the responsibility for this area is over 2 directorates. So I wonder how you've just suggested that you work well together to identify this, but how about identifying the root cause of these issues? I know you've suggested some of the behavioural issues, but the root cause and what we can do about that. I'm going back to this social emotional learning and the opportunity, the wonderful welcome information that we're getting, 100,000, I think, perhaps in the budget. We've got 100,000 in the budget coming for social and emotional mental health. Wonder what else we could be doing in schools to encourage resilience, coping skills, psycho-ed education, upskilling the people. I know we've got ELSA, and we've got lots of as I said in the other meetings as well, we've got lots, and it's really good. We've got ELSA, we've got all these practice trauma-informed people and whatever to step in reactively, but proactively. Can we be doing more in primary schools? Because I see, as a psychotherapist, quite a few people in primary schools, we were primary school age, and older children, young people. So can we be doing more to help young people before their issues become a problem to them, and help them understand the changes they're going through, and of course the massive transition, which is adolescence, and that's starting earlier and earlier in some cases, and also the impact of trauma. But when we talked about the Schools Health Research Network, the document said that one school had decided to increase the resilience learning, the having sessions per week to help people understand the changes that are going on for them, and psycho-ed, as I said, and wonder which school that is, and what we might be doing to learn from that and share that learning throughout all the schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Sharon.
Okay. I think absence, as we said, absence from schools is for a number of reasons. It's really important that we collectively as a directorate know all our children and their needs well enough, and so as do our schools, to make sure that if there are issues or concerns or barriers or challenges to attending school, then we are able to support them in the best way we can. We work closely with our inclusion colleagues with that, and we are very, we can't always, as a EWS service, address a need which perhaps is requiring some specific and specialist intervention, but our colleagues can, and they can, we communicate that to them very regularly. There's also the school's responsibilities as well to be able to meet the needs of those pupils and to ensure that the curriculum that they offer is appropriately developing that sense of resilience as they get older, and they can cope with changes a lot better than maybe they would have done it when they were younger. It is difficult and complicated. I know that many schools that I visit are actually engaging in particular programs to develop their resilience, pupils' resilience, and using a lot of different strategies to encourage pupils to attend more regularly, and are also engaged and being supported by other colleagues to look at provision that they have to enable them to come to school more regularly. I don't know the school that you're talking about particularly at this minute in time, I'm sorry, but collectively we are working to make sure that all of the children, wherever possible, can come to schools. But on some occasions, they're just not able to do so for potentially some medical need or other. But wherever possible, they have the support they require to be there as often as they can.
Thank you, Sharon. Councillor Bond, you content?
So really, yes, understanding that those are the reasons, but it's the understanding that I was on people committee scrutiny, and then P&O did a similar similar area of issue or of interest. I wonder if, because I only know about the people scrutiny one because I would happen to be deputising. So should we, and you've just suggested that you don't know about this school that decided to have these psychoed sessions that because they've done their health research during the health research network. So is there an opportunity, for example, when we discuss people like this or education, we have people scrutiny and P&O maybe, because it sounds like I wouldn't have heard about some of the missing children from education, home education, if I wasn't on that. So have we got a crossover that maybe we'd all benefit from, and maybe also like yourself, and is this the difference in directorate possibly that you're not aware of some of that other information? So are we together as effective as we could be in a joined up way, both scrutiny and from the directorates? Thank you.
Sharon, did you want to answer that from the point of view of the directorates?
Yeah, thank you. We are all part of the same directorate and we all do work together, but we have different things that we just bring different things that complement the work of each other. I mean, we can, as a team, we always feel collectively that we could always do more. There's always more to do. I think that's the joy of being in education and working with pupils. You always think that you can do more, even though you can see the difference that you're making. And I think we will benefit this year from an additional member to our team, which was being funded through the budget. So that will help us to do a little bit more work. But it is us working together collectively as a team, which we do, in order to make sure that, as I said, the children have the best opportunities and support and provision they can, where it's appropriate, to be able to attend school as often as they can.
Thanks, Sharon. And from the point of view of scrutiny, we're always open to the option or the possibility of doing joint scrutiny meetings, as you'll be aware, Councillor Bond. I think we need to also be cautious that we can't make every meeting a joint meeting, or we'd end up just with one great big scrutiny meeting across the council. I'll be just referring in a second when we get onto the forward plan, another joint meeting that we'll be putting forward into the planner. Robert, I know you were trying to.
Oh, possibly just to overlap with what you were going to say, Chair. Just to just on that point about sort of overlapping or non-overlapping, as the case may be. It is something we're increasingly conscious of, Councillor Bond. So I think first of all, we have the scrutiny chairs meetings on a semi-regular basis to try to address some of these things up front between the committees in terms of which one is doing what. But we are increasingly trying to be proactive in inviting members of other committees into items that we think will be of joint interest. So we've had some recently, and we've got a few more coming up. For example, WESP. So that we are trying to be more proactive about pointing members towards things so that they don't get lost in that way. But if in doubt, please always just check agendas that are published for any items on any committee that you might have an interest in, on which you don't sit. But we're going to be try to continue to be proactive in pointing you towards those things.
Thank you, Robert. Yeah, it's a really well made point. So, it is important to check those other agendas, and of course you can look at the meeting itself on the recording at any time. Thank you, Councillor Bond. Some really useful points, and Sharon also. Can I just finish with a real question around an area of particular concern that comes out and sits there very clearly within the reports, which is those young learners who have free school meals, which is the ages between 5 and 15, I think. And if I remember from our last meetings, I think that was of the order of 14% of our learners in that age group, 5 to 15, who have access to free school meals. If I recall correctly, please correct that. The concern is clearly the numbers that are presenting of non-attendance. So you were showing us earlier, Sharon, what equates to 3 out of, or just about 3 out of 10 young learners in Caldecott High School, or learners in Caldecott High School, who are not attending school at any given time of the year. And in Monmouth and in King Henry School, it's 1 in 5. And the correlation, and we've referred to this before, I know I'm not touching on something you're not fully aware of, and I know you're working on, but the correlation between non-attendance and not achieving any educational outcomes, moving into the world of NEETs and unemployment and benefits, is such a startling concern that tackling it as early as possible is clearly to everyone's advantage, but most of all to those young people who would be potentially really caught within that very difficult trajectory. So I just wonder, just briefly, and I realize we could spend the next couple of hours, and I don't propose that we do on this, is there anything you particularly wanted to say about how we are very particularly addressing that very clear area of concern? Thank you.
Yes, I think, as I mentioned earlier, in all of our consultations, we do focus very much on the attendance of pupils who are eligible for free school meals. And in some cases, some of these pupils might be out of school for a little while because they are waiting for wider services to be able to help and support them back into school. They're not necessarily all FSM, but it is likely that that may be the case. But we do focus very much on that as a discussion, and the strategies the school is using, as well as the support that we're giving to those pupils to make sure that it does support, attendance better than it is. But we do work really hard on doing that, and it is a focus for us, particularly in our secondary schools. And those meetings are held fortnightly. So we talk about those pupils. The first fortnight it would be Key Stage 3, and the second would be Key Stage 4. So we're talking about those pupils every month. And if there's a concern in between, we'll pick that up directly with the school as well.
Thank you, Sharon. That's reassuring to know. And I see there are no more hands up. So this is a report for us to receive, which we do. And thank you very much for everybody who's raised some very good questions, and Sharon for being so clear in your responses, and Will too. So thank you very much indeed for that. And I'm going to move us on to item 7 on the agenda, which is Council and Cabinet Planner, which is there for you to see and to, I think, draw some thoughts together in regard to how it relates to item 8, which is our Scrutiny Committee work planner and action list. On the work planner, we're moving this through the year, and the point I was just referring to a few minutes ago about the potential for a joint meeting would be with audit and governance at the very recent activity around a peer panel review of the council as that's taken place, and the statutory place for the report to go to is audit and governance. I was talking to Matthew Gatehouse earlier and suggesting, or we had a discussion in which we were perhaps concluding it would be a good thing for us to have a joint session there, which would be led by audit and governance, because the report has to go there. So, Robert, if you could we'll need to try and see how we build that into the work planner. But yeah, the planner is there for your engagement and your thoughts, and if there are any particular areas. Robert.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so just a couple of things, because Will's offered to stay to discuss one item in particular for the future, but just very quickly before that, just since this was published, the agenda, we've just added some items just for you all to know. So we've got the Chief Executive will come to us at our next meeting to talk about the for purpose, on purpose, I can't say. Not sure what the term for it is. Yes, but as to what it is, it's sort of an overview of. Anyway, yes, he already tells us, but it was supposed to be specifically through the lens of an area of concern that's come up, which is project management at a sort of senior level in the organisation. So he's going to come as a preliminary to discuss FPOP through that lens, and then subsequent to that, because this was the specific concern in terms of infrastructure project management, there's going to be a separate item on that in our July meeting. So the one that will flow on from the Chief Executive's item with us. And then Jane Rogers's annual safeguarding report and annual director's report for social care have been added into our September meeting, just subsequent, since the agenda was published. And then the thing I was building up to was it was raised at the last meeting, the prospect of us scrutinising the impact of the curriculum. Specifically, Councillor Buckler had raised that, and it was, Will is here for us to discuss perhaps the how and the when. So I don't know whether.
Okay, let's start with the how, and see whether we can then fix on the when. Will, what was your thinking?
So thank you, Chair. I think when Robert and I discussed this, it actually felt like something which would be really interesting to bring to the committee. In terms of the progress that all of our schools have made now, in terms of the implementation of the new Welsh curriculum, and the 6 associated areas of learning and experience, just for everybody to have a sense around what the structures are, what the expectations are within it, and so on, because I think that will really inform then broader conversations about where our education approach is, how that's being taken forward, and it will feed into the new qualification debates and discussions as they begin to impact.
That sounds like a good approach, and it's probably something offline we should try to just get that clarity and make sure, Councillor Buckler, that touches on the areas that you were keen to explore further. We will then go away and try and figure out the when, and so we can build that into diaries. Councillor Bond, I see you've had your hand up patiently for the last couple of minutes.
Thank you. So the only other thing, I had all those down, but also Social Partnership and Public Procurement Act report. Would that be something we could look at, possibly? I was looking on the forward planner. Sorry, the council planner.
Is that not governance and audit?
I just about to say, we'll have Councillor Bond. We'll have a look at that, but I think that belongs to another scrutiny committee, governance and audit. We'll have a look, and I'm sure Robert will get back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Just to say, the other issue that, just to repeat it, is that we can't take any number, an infinite number of reports during the year. So what we've been trying to do is to limit it, generally speaking, hopelessly unsuccessfully on my part in some cases, but trying to limit it to 2 main reports. And if there is a third or a fourth, that we include it for information, but not for the full scrutiny, because otherwise our meetings will become excessively long. So it's just to bear that in mind as well. We will inevitably need to prioritize. Okay, great. I'm going to move us along, and thank you for those comments. We've got the action list, which was relating to the use of the leisure centres. Councillor Bond, I know you followed up with Robert with a further email request on some of that, and I think
Rob, there was subsequent.
There was some further correspondence on that.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're moving on finally to confirm the meetings at number 9, meeting the minutes of the previous meeting. If you have any issues or corrections, please let us know. I see none, so they are confirmed. And the next meeting is, my goodness, after Easter, would you believe it? 21st of April, and we look forward to seeing everybody there. Thanks very much indeed. It's been a long meeting, but we've covered some incredibly important reports, and I really appreciate, Will, you patiently staying with us, but also dealing with all the issues that have necessarily been discussed today, and the overriding issue being we all have the same interest, which is for the very best outcomes for our learners in Monmouthshire. Thank you very much indeed, and we close the meeting.
Thank you, bye.